Welcome to the Fantasy Fangirls Podcast, where two sisters dive deep into beloved fantasy lore, characters, themes, theories, and more.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode, where we are covering chapters 18 through 22 of A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. But as always, before we begin this deep dive, please listen closely to our content warning. While we're focusing our discussion on chapters 18 through 22 and book 2, we are going to bring in themes, foreshadowing, lore, and other insights across the ACOTAR series. So yes, that does mean these episodes are spoiler central for all of the ACOTAR books. These ACOMAF deep dives do not, however, include spoilers for the rest of Sarah J. Maas's series, except at the end of every episode, where we include our Maasverse Madness segment. We'll give a big spoiler warning beforehand, so if you have not read the Maasverse, you can leave the episode right there, no worries at all, or you can keep listening for Throne of Glass and /Horror Crescent City crossover callouts.
So with all of that said, we meet the Bone Carver and the Weaver in this episode. Y'all, it is about to get intense with lore and theories, and we have never met this more. Please only keep listening if you have read all of the ACOTAR books. And if you haven't, we will be here when you're done with the series.
And of course, we at Fantasy Fangirls are adults who say adult things about adult books. In other words, folks, this podcast is rated R.
Lexi, did you like the sight of Rhys kneeling before Feyre? Because I sure did. And I'm going to take every single moment to talk about it in this episode, so please be mindful of little listening ears. One of Fantasy Fangirls' core values is celebrating all things feral, whether it's writing a love letter to smut or giving a little purr when we talk about our favorite shadow daddy. We are all about embracing your sexuality here at FFG. And our partner for today's video, Bellesa, helps so many people do just that. Our friends at Bellesa are literally, wait for it, friends, hold your horses here. They are sending out free vibrators and gift cards for vibrators to everyone who signs up for this giveaway.
We are so excited because Bellesa aligns with so many of our values here at Fantasy Fangirls. Bellesa is a by-women company for all things sexual wellness, and their mission is to empower everyone to embrace, explore, and celebrate their sexuality.
And they were kind enough to send us some goodies. So I have to say, my personal favorite is the Pebble. It is super cute. It comes in this adorable little circular charging case, and it's super discreet. I mean, like, look at this. I never think that this is a vibrator. It's ergonomically built to fit in your hand, like all perfect and such. And Lexi, this is my favorite part about it. When you're using a vibrator and then all of a sudden it goes like, you like hit a button and it goes, and you're just like, God damn it, I was so close. There's no annoying pattern modes on this Pebble boy right here. I love it. If you know, you know. Love you, Pebble.
For me, my favorite has to be the Air Vibe Pro. Just like Nicole's Pebble, it comes in a discreet charging case, and hey, we got a remote control too. It offers dual stimulation and is waterproof. Hey-o. And trust me, nothing takes you out of the mood more than feeling like your toy sounds like a construction crew is buzzing outside your window. But no, the Air Vibe Pro is silent, but deadly in the best way possible.
So again, Bellesa is giving everyone who signs up for our giveaway either a free sex toy or a gift card. All you need to do is follow the link in the description below. And again, a huge thank you to Bellesa.
As we head into summer, we are so excited to be podcast partners at several live events coming up.
We are going to be at LeakyCon in Portland, Oregon this July 5th through 7th. Literally dream come true. I cannot believe we're saying these words. Get your ticket for 10% off at the link in our show notes.
And we'll be at the Dragon Gauntlet event in Boyne City, Michigan this August 16th and 17th. We're hosting a live show at both LeakyCon and the Dragon Gauntlet, and we're participating in tons of other activities during these multi-day events. Links to both of them, LeakyCon and the Dragon Gauntlet, are in the show notes or YouTube captions, however you're listening.
We have extra special discount codes for both of these events for our lovely Patreon members, so be sure to head to your Patreon portal for more details.
Speaking of, if you love Fantasy Fangirls and this ACOMAF journey we are on together, if you want more content, more community, discounts on live events, more live events, and so much more, please check out our Patreon.
We have 2 tiers that you can join. The Valkyries, which includes access to our Boppin' Discord, live Q&As from Lexi and I, community events and book club, plus a 20% off discounted and exclusive merch store, all for $5 a month. Or you can join the High Fae, which includes everything from the Valkyrie level, plus early access to ad-free episodes, our full episode outlines. And yes, those do include the Maasverse Madness, which people have told us are like gold to have those in writing. And you also get special voting privileges as a High Fae. That is for $10 a month.
Join the party at patreon.com/fantasy fangirls. And of course, the link is in the show notes or YouTube captions.
And now it's time to go back to the prison for round 2.
Nicole's going to open up this discussion with a summary of what happens in chapters 18 through 22. So gather round, friends. We need an Inner Circle debrief, like an actual one, because they actually have Inner Circle debriefs in this episode. I love it.
Only took us 11 episodes to get to a real one. It's fine. Chapter 18. Waking up, Feyre notices Edna Mode at the foot of her bed. Nope, it's just a tiny ancient monster. Amren tosses Feyre an amulet that will absolutely, totally, 100% protect her from getting trapped in the prison. Later, Rhys and Feyre walk into the mountainous caverns that house some of the most deadly creatures in Prythian, like a little boy. Tossing the carver a bone from the Midgard worm, the bone carver and Feyre start to exchange bunches of knowledge. Feyre first sharing the details of her death from under the mountain. Seeing that as sufficient info payment, the bone carver shares that a bone can be used to resurrect a new person only by using the Cauldron and this little tool called the Book of Breathings. Where is this book, you ask? One half is with the Summer Court and the other half is with the 6 mortal queens on the continent. And only those who are made can speak the spells from this book. That's very important. Feyre, stepping into oversharing mode yet again, shares one more bit of info with the bone carver. When she died, she followed a tug back to home. Burr, 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 burr. Seeing this as sufficient tea she just spilled, the bone carver offers up a bit more info. This book can also make all the Cauldron's powers go bye-bye. Together, Rhys and Feyre leave the prison, sharing who they saw the bone carver materialize as. Rhys saw Jurian, Feyre saw a little boy who looks a hell of a lot like Rhysand. Chapter 19. Waiting like dogs for treats, Mor, Asriel, and Cassian are in the townhouse when they return. Rhys gives them an Inner Circle debrief and explains his plan to get both these halves of the Book of Breathings. How convenient that they have someone who has the power and an imprint of all 7 High Lords, meaning that Feyre can steal the book from the Summer Court. They need to test this theory first, though, to the Weaver to retrieve a special object of Rhys's that has no special meaning whatsoever. The next day, Rhys, on his knees, helps Feyre into her armor and walks her through the deadly mission for her 3rd day of work. You know, Feyre, maybe it's time to find a job that doesn't put you into mortal peril every other day. We have HR to speak to. Chapter 20. In the Weaver's Woods, Feyre and Rhys walk towards the cottage, but Rhys, playing his mind games, wants to get her super turned on, angry, and annoyed before walking into the cottage, because that's all better than fear. Feyre enters the seemingly normal-looking cottage with a very terrifying creature singing an even more terrifying song. Feyre finds Rhys's object, a beautiful silver and sapphire ring, and takes it. The Weaver stops singing. Chapter 21. The Weaver seeks out this intruder, and Feyre sets the house on fire. Great house guest, Feyre. Then climbs up the hair and people fat-coated chimney. Yummy. Stopping herself from spiraling into a complete anxiety attack, Feyre smashes the top of the chimney and escapes. Feyre is furious with Rhys because she almost died and our guy is lounging in the tree like a sloth, but he winnows her back to the townhouse. Feyre is ready for a bath and a nap, but Rhys has more up his sleeve. You sick of me saying that yet, listeners? He shows her mind to mind a 100-year-old memory of Ianthe failing to seduce him in the hopes of them becoming the ultimate power couple. But after showing this horrible memory, Rhys warns Feyre never to go into another person's mind unless you hold the door open to escape if needed. Chapter 22. The next day, it's Feyre and Mor bonding time. Mor sharing some of her own personal story about how she was betrothed to someone for political gain, but the Bat Boys protected her. Feyre apologizes to Mor for being such a bitch when they first met. Cue Hannah Montana's "Nobody's perfect." And Mor drops the most important advice I've ever heard. You'll have good days and hard days. Don't let the hard days win. Our girl bonding time is over, though, because it's time to head off to the human lands to face the most terrifying creature of this chapter stretch, Nesta Archeron. And Elaine's there, too.
It's time to step into the Cauldron and discuss key insights, character analysis, foreshadowing, theories, and so much more.
We open this chapter stretch with Feyre jolting awake because, like a horror movie, Amren is standing at the end of her bed. Feyre thinks about how no one else can get into this house without Rhys's permission. So the question I have right off the bat is, how did Amren get in? Because I wonder, Do you think she just lets Rhys believe that he's super powerful and can choose who to come in, but she's really like, I hold my beer, my guy?
While I do think that she is probably that powerful, I've always been under the impression he let Amren in and asked her to talk to Feyre and help her have the courage to face the prison. He didn't know she was going to give Feyre the amulet, but he knew if there was one person who could help her face her fears about going into the prison, it would absolutely be Amren, who literally did get out of the prison. So I'm assuming he let her in and he's like, okay, Amren, you got to talk to my girl here. And then Amren comes in and does her big scary thing.
Oh, interesting. I always pictured it as Amren acting alone, like without Rhys's knowledge, which I I'm not going to lie, I kind of like, because then it is also like they're all trying to help Feyre. It's not just Rhys being like, help my girl. It's them all already viewing her as someone who's going to be around for a while.
But she still has to get inside the house.
That's why I think she's super powerful. And she just hasn't told Rhys that she's that powerful. She just lets him believe that he has this power to let anyone in, whoever he wants. And she's like, okay, that's cute. That's cute, youngin'. Anyway.
Agree to disagree.
Oh, we're starting off strong this episode. Amren gives Feyre an amulet necklace with a pearl and cloudy blue stone. Listen, I tried to make this a gem watch. I tried to look up what this cloudy blue stone could be. And the truth is, there's about 40 different options. So this is a passive gem watch. There's a gem. We see it. It could be 40 different things. I have no idea. Amren tells Feyre that she was wearing this necklace when she left the prison. And as long as Feyre is wearing it, they cannot keep her inside the prison. I remember reading this for the first time and being like, yeah, she's lying. Like, there's no way this is real.
That's so funny because when I first read it, I was like, ooh, a mystery to learn how this helped her get out of the prison. I was so excited to learn.
Well, the truth is, the mystery is that Rhys gave her this necklace, her Amren, this necklace, ages ago. And it was at the bottom of one of her drawers. I love that on the hike up to the prison, Rhys is like frowning at the amulet. And he's like, she gave you that? It's a statement. It's not a question. But you can just imagine what's going through his head.
Well, for Amren to give anyone a piece of her jewelry, even let them borrow it, is probably something he's never seen her do before. Remember how much emphasis Rhys put on her being a jewelry hoarder and don't you dare touch her things or she will literally kill you. And then just a few days later, Amren gives her something, probably making Rhys go like, wait, what?
You know what? I guarantee you it's because Amren does feel a sense of, I'm going to call it kinship with Feyre because they're both made. Yes. They are both made. And I think she already has a very, I don't know if it's a soft spot for Feyre, but she already has a connection to Feyre that Rhys is like, did we just bypass several hundred years of you guys bonding and you just immediately gave her a piece of jewelry? What the fuck?
I think yes. And by now she does know that Feyre is his mate. And of course she is very loyal to Rhys. And so therefore she's going to be loyal to Feyre as well and help her out.
And you know what? This placebo effect, I'm going to be honest, it's kind of brilliant. It's kind of brilliant on Amren's part. She knows who Feyre is at her core, especially since I'm sure Amren knows all the deets of what happened under the mountain. She knows that Feyre is brave and strong. She's a Gryffindor. Amren knew that all Feyre needed was something to convince herself that she could get out in order to quiet down that overactive fear part of her brain. And when she calmed that part down, she could prove to herself that she still is this, again, Gryffindor at her core.
Side note, we know that we are interchangeably saying that she is a Gryffindor and a Slytherin because SJM does consider Feyre a Slytherin with some Hufflepuff in her. And Nicole and I are pretty adamant that that just means that she is a Gryffindor. She's like 75% Gryffindor and 25% Slytherin. So that's where the interchangeableness is coming from. Feyre needed more than words of encouragement like you're talking about here. Amren could have given a whole speech about strength and self-discipline to motivate Feyre and reassure her that she can and will walk out of that prison. But instead, she gave her an object and said that this is what got her out, which Feyre will be able to grip when she needs to draw on that inner courage and remind herself that she can and will get out. It's a physical way of centering and grounding herself when she really needs it. And that's truly what she needs because, hey, trying to talk herself into it yesterday, it didn't work. And so this is another avenue that is a more physical representation of being able to get out. And she knew that she needed it.
Can you imagine Amren giving like a full-blown motivational pep talk? It would be Edna Mode. She'd be, pull yourself together. Like it would be full-blown, like she would just slap her and call it motivation.
She does give Nesta one. It might be a little bit more off page.
Honestly, the more we deep dive this book, the more I'm like, I think Amren actually might be one of my favorite characters. I love her. On the hike up to the prison, Feyre starts asking questions about the members of the Inner Circle. We went through most of this in vast detail last episode. That was so focused on our crew and the dinner and in the dining room and all that kind of stuff. So let's just highlight a few things that we did not go into detail already. Specifically, how Asriel got these scars on his hands. Asriel was born a bastard from an Illyrian lord, and the wife of the lord was furious. This is notably not Asriel's birth mother. And she was furious that he existed because he's a bastard. And she locked Asriel in a cell with no windows and no light for 11 years. Can we just sit with that for a second? Wow. Oh my God. How Asriel is even slightly normal is quite amazing. And in this amount of darkness, he learned to befriend the shadows. This is where I think he was born a shadow singer, but this is how he honed that shadow singer. They let him outside for an hour a day, and they let him see his birth mother for an hour once a week. But when he was 8, his shitstick brothers decided it would be fun to see what happens when you mix the quick healing gifts of an Illyrian with oil and fire. And while the warriors nearby heard Asriel screaming for the fire on his hands and they ran over, there was nothing they could do in time in order to save the skin on his hands. One of the most common complaints or praises, it really depends on who you're talking to around Asriel, is that he speaks very little throughout the series. And while yes, I do think that is due to his introverted nature, but also I want us to think about his upbringing. He was in a cell with absolutely no light, no people to talk to except for shadows for 11 years. Of course, this affected him deeply. So I think that this is also a huge reason why he is so observant and quiet throughout most of the series. I also want to point out that when his hands were burned, he was 8. He left when he was 11 to Windhaven to go train. That left him with 3 years still living in a cell with his father and these 2 brothers. Woof. My heart so goes out to Asriel. When Feyre asks if they, the brothers, were punished, Rhys only answers with an eventually. Yikes.
Yeah, that means that they were definitely the ones to punish the brothers. And I am assuming that means that they are dead now.
I would assume as well. Which
they did.
They did. This isn't the only time we get the 3 Bat Boys called in for some family vengeance. Rhys and Asriel will join Cassian in killing everyone in Cassian's birth village who was responsible for hurting and thus killing his mother, including ripping his birth father to shreds. We love our Bat Boys. The conversation moves to Amren's role in the Inner Circle. Amren, we know, is Rhys's second, and here we learn that she's his political advisor, walking library, and doer of dirty work. I want to know what that last one means.
It's interesting, too, that Asriel was described as the one who did Rhys's dad's dirty work when he was High Lord. And now as Rhys's spy master, he still does the dirty work, at least the torturing part of it. So if I had to guess, Amren does the more outward and open dirty work, while Az does more in his shadows and darkness, if that makes any sense.
I think that definitely makes sense. And I also think that Amren is the go-to intimidation button. Like if, let's say, some people in the Hewn City aren't being very cooperative, Rhys can be like, do you want Amren to pay a visit? And immediately they'd get their shit together. Today's Suriel section is all about the prison. And in fact, it's in 2 parts today because it is so intense. Everyone give Lexi a big virtual hug because she did a lot for today's Suriel section. But there is one moment I want to pull out here. The guards who dwell within the rock of the mountain, they only emerge at feeding time and to deal with the restless prisoners. Quote, they are nothing but shadows of thought and an ancient spell. This is perfectly setting the tone for these chapters that we're about to cover that are spooky scary. We're about to be in some horrifying chapters. But also, where the literal fuck were these guards when Lanthus escaped? When also Amren escaped? Hot take, these guards suck at their jobs. The 2 times prisoners escape, they don't do shit.
I will come. I'm suddenly having to defend the prison guards here. 2 criminals have escaped in how many millennia that they've had their jobs. That's a pretty good ratio. I mean, all things considered. I've always thought of the guards as similar to Dementors. Again, bringing in our Harry Potter references here with magic that we're more familiar with. In that, while yes, they are ancient magic themselves, they can, of course, be tricked. Amren bound herself to a new body that indeed does not belong to the prison. Think of Sirius turning into a dog and being undetected as he slipped out. The harp is what opened Lanthus's cell door. And because the harp is older than the prison and holds so much of its own ancient power, I'm guessing that its magic worked differently and was once again able to trick the guards.
Fair. In that same situation, though, Lanthus is out and about in the halls of the prison. And if these guards dwell within the walls of the prison, they were just watching this duel.
Yeah, when we get to that part, we will definitely be dissecting the whole logistics around what is happening.
Amazing.
Yes.
Something to look forward to in November. I can't wait.
Sorry, it's so far away, but I know it's going to come in no time.
Truly. When Feyre asks if all 7 High Lords have access to the prison, we get a major alarm moment. Quote, "No. The prison is law unto itself. The island may even be an 8th court, but it falls under my jurisdiction, and my blood is keyed to the gates." Oh, hello, 8th court. This is huge foreshadowing for what we believe ACOTAR 6 will be about. What is the only solar court that we are missing? Ah, yes, it is the Dusk Court.
And think about it. The Night Court is the largest territory, so it makes sense that there was previously a Dusk Court before the land was divided into just 7 courts, with each having their own High Lord.
And I also want to point out that on the cover of A Court of Silver Flames, there is a mask, and at the top of the mask, there is a sun that is half covered. So it could be a rising sun or it could be a setting sun. And there's so much queen language around Nesta. There is a high chance and a big old theory that Nesta could become High Lady of the Dusk Court. We could get wholly down that rabbit hole right now, but we are wanting to save at least some of that conversation for A Court of Silver Flames.
So pretending like a gigantic Easter egg about an 8th court was not just dropped casually in one line, let's explain how the prison falls under Rhys's jurisdiction. The prison island is located off the northern shore of the Night Court. So yes, this means that it falls within Night Court territory. Though to be clear, it is law unto itself, so it is not part of the Night Court, like say the Illyrian Mountains are. The High Lord of the Night Court, so in our case right now, Rhys, is the only one with a, quote, key to the gate, because their blood is the key. When Rhys is not the one to personally need access to the prison, I believe he has to lower the wards around the prison in order to let someone else in, like Cassian and Nesta, which will definitely have some dire consequences in Silver Flames. I do wonder if Feyre, because she has some of Rhys's power, although she's not part of his bloodline, would she be able to access the prison? I don't believe that's the case because she does not do that when she and Cassian go to the prison in ACOWAR. But we'll dissect all of that when we get to that point. Bottom line is, Rhys is the one with the key because he is the High Lord of the Night Court and it's part of his family bloodline there. Because the prison falls under Rhys's jurisdiction, he is also the one to sentence criminals to the prison. And yes, friends, he has done it before. Lanthus, for a perfect example. And once they're sentenced, they belong to the prison and it will never let them out. Rhys, being the good leader he is, stresses that he takes sentencing people here very seriously because he understands what he's doing and that it's forever. Progress isn't about waking up one day and magically being where you want to be, as much as we all really wish it was otherwise. It's about the little steps along the way that build the success you dream about. And with the Chime Secured Credit Builder Visa credit card, it's easy to start building credit little by little with everyday purchases and regular on-time payments with no annual fees or interest. And if your credit score grows, so could your opportunities for lower rates on loans, like for a car or home.
Chime is a game changer. There's no annual fees, interest, or credit check to apply. And you can use it everywhere Visa credit cards are accepted. And listen, money can get tight sometimes. We remember the times of consistently checking our bank accounts to make sure we didn't overdraft or get an overdraft fee. But with Chime's Spot Me feature, you can overdraft up to $200 without fees when you set up a qualifying direct deposit.
With Chime's secure credit card, you can start improving your credit score right away. Get started today at chime.com/fantasy fangirl. That's Chime, CHIME.com/fantasy fangirl. Chime feels like progress.
The Chime Credit Builder Visa credit card is issued by the Bancorp Bank N.A. or Stride Bank N.A. members FDIC. Spot Me eligibility requirements and overdraft limits apply. Out-of-network ATM withdrawals and OTC advance fees may apply. Terms and conditions apply. Go to chime.com/disclosures for details. Moving forward into the prison, Feyre asks about Amryn, specifically not speaking her name. Asriel, we learn, looked into just how long Amren was in the prison for.
He searched Prythian's oldest archives in the oldest temples and libraries. The only thing he could find was that she went in before Prythian was split into courts, and it predates the written word. Rhys guesses that she was in there for a few thousand years because when she escaped by trapping herself in a high fae body, the courts and the high lords had already been established.
When Fae-vorite, surprised, asks Rhys why he never asked Amren what the story is there, he says, quote, "Why bother? She'll tell me when it's necessary."
We know Amren was put in the prison an unknown amount of time after she slipped through the rift and into Prythian. Amren was hunted and captured during a period that Fae were getting completely rid of the Daglin, and it is my understanding they thought that she was associated with them, so that is why she was captured and put in the prison.
Several questions here. Do you think we're ever going to get the full Amren backstory? If we do, would it be in ACOTAR 6, or I'm going to even gather a future, like 7 or 8?
I think it entirely depends on what direction ACOTAR 6 goes in.
Yeah.
There are so many possibilities. We know that it is going to be pretty central on Azriel. We can also guess that Elaine is going to be very prominent in it as well. Whether that means that they will be a love interest or their own 2 separate stories, we're not sure yet. I could see her being prominent in a different series, in the speculated 4th SJM series about this universe's gods. I feel like Amren has to be resurrected in ACOWAR for a reason. So I'm waiting for that reason to come to light, and I think it could be in a future book. Like, why do we still need Amren in our story? Again, that's nothing against Amren. I just think plot-wise, it would have made more emotional impact if she did not pop out of the cauldron and be resurrected. Anyway, there's also so much else to cover in the next ACOTAR that I would be very curious how or if Amren plays a key role in it. Like, there are way too many other storylines that we're waiting on, and Amren's is not the most prominent front and center one. So I could see how it could be woven into the story, but I just don't, it could potentially be like too much, you know? So I almost hope that it's actually a different 4th series, that we get more on her.
Well, and let's not forget, she drops the whole Rhysand with these 3 powerful weapons that Nesta made in, by just beating the shit out of these things. You could be High King. And that could have only come from Amren. I don't think anyone else would have the knowledge or the walking library information in order to drop that kind of info. That right there, I think, is one of the big reasons that Amren was resurrected. Now, what direction that's going to go, I'm very curious, because I don't see Rhys doing that right now.
Yeah, we will see. We will see.
But Fae-vorite asks where Amren came from. And this is a big, big Easter egg right here, friends, because Rhys says he doesn't know, but, quote, "Though there are legends that claimed when the world was born, there were rips in the fabric of the realms, that in the chaos of forming, creatures from other worlds could walk through one of those rips and enter another world. But the rips closed at will, and the creatures could become trapped with no way home." This is the second book, and this paragraph is so overlooked. We never think about it when it comes to Mist and Fury. We don't think about these kind of info drops. We will later learn the full-ish story of Amren in chapter 27 of ACOWAR. Right after leveling 2 cities in a different world, by the way, a rip opened in the sky. All of her brothers and sisters who helped her level these 2 cities fled from the big sky hole. But Amren, having a spark of curiosity for the first time in her life, side note, she was not bred to feel something as selfish as wanting or curiosity. She then ended up in Prythian and was mistaken, like Lexi said, for someone who aided the Daglin or worked with the Daglin, and was thus thrown into the prison. I forget how much information we actually have on Amren until we do this deep dive. I was like, oh my God, we actually know so much more than I think we as fans remember.
I'm like, I feel like I need to go back and double check my ebook. I trust you, but I do not remember her like leveling cities and having brothers and sisters and all of that. So I think I need to read chapter 27 of ACOWAR again.
Chapter 27 is a big chapter, and I'm not going to lie, I never remember it. I'll be real. The amount of stuff that I've pulled from ACOWAR in this deep dive, I'm like, I've read this book at least 6 times.
It is so different with the audiobook and reading it and taking the notes like we are now. So I'm the exact same way, Nicole. As Rhys and Fae-vorite descend further down the path going into the belly of the mountain, I just have to say how sweet it is that they're holding hands. Fae-vorite is clutching his Reese's fingers to keep herself from losing her footing, both literally as she walks and mentally as she fights her own trauma from being trapped under the mountain. Even when Feyre needs to take a break for water, Reese doesn't let go of her hand. This is how he protects her and offers her strength, going into the belly of the beast with her and offering comfort and support, but not taking her own ability to do it away from her.
Before we get into the scene with the bone carver, we need to address Feyre's question, which is, who is he? What is he? Rhys mentions that no one knows, but he will appear to you as whatever he wills. But different from a shapeshifter, he could be talking to two people, like he is right here, and the bone carver will materialize as something to one person and as something completely different to the other. Him and his siblings, Striga, aka the Weaver, and Kosjay, are described as death gods because of their power literally allowing them to eat life itself. There have also been some theories that the bone carver is the god of truth, which, yes, we will expand much more on today's Maasverse Madness. Sorry, everyone, this is a huge Maasverse Madness episode. But crossover possibilities aside, you're never allowed to lie to him. I do wonder what would happen if you tried, but that's just me and my chaos brain. But while the bone carver is a very all-knowing kind of person, I don't know if I'm fully in the camp of this god of truth, because there are some things that he still doesn't know, or at least he's not sharing. Because versus the Suriel, who is already our all-knowing walking Google, the Suriel knows everything unless the Cauldron is blocking it. Whereas I don't feel like the bone carver's in that same camp. What are your thoughts?
They're both sources of truth and information, but yes, their powers are very different in what they know and how they know it. The bone carver is obviously a lot more dangerous and otherworldly than the Suriel. For instance, the bone carver knows Feyre's name and what she's personally experienced, and he somehow knows to appear as Jurian to Rhys in this exchange, so we can assume he somehow knows that Rhys is coming to ask him questions about resurrecting Jurian, even though they never state specifically who they're talking about. But the bone carver is also curious for more information and wants to ask his own questions, whereas the Suriel just seems to, I'll say, know what it knows. I definitely lean towards these God of Truth characteristics, reflecting just more on how mysterious and otherworldly he is, because he is more presumably a death god.
Especially with what we see in ACOWAR with him as the Illyrian warrior and stuff. I feel like it makes more sense with the death god.
Well, and then he also has like premonitions about people's deaths, and he carves their deaths onto the bone, which we'll talk about at a much later time because that's a whole other story.
Yeah. Feyre and Rhys walk into the cell, and inside is a little boy with crushing blue/violet eyes and black hair. It will be hundreds of pages before we learn that Feyre infers this is her and Rhys's son. She will see her mouth, aka her father's mouth, in the boy in ACOWAR. There have been a lot of speculations on if this is another character, but I think we are very much in this is Feyre and Rhys's little boy. Now, we assume that this is Nyx. However, this also could be a second child because there are no wings, but also it could be Nyx and he's just like his dad and his wings can turn on and off like a light switch.
I'm inclined to think that it's Nyx, and Nyx has the same ability to have wings or have no wings, but that's just my gut feeling.
This is also the moment where this book, like we had it last book with, the bogey and the naga and these really terrifying creatures, but this is when it becomes a literal horror movie, because creepy little children are like my number one no. I hate movies with creepy little children, but I love this scene with the bone carver. I don't know what the difference is.
Well, let's discuss why the bone carver appears as he does for our two characters here. The short answer is we truly don't know, but that's no fun, so let's speculate. Does the bone carver show who the person needs to see? For instance, Rhys is coming here to ask questions about Jurian, and the bone carver appears as Jurian to him, and he appears as Feyre's future child as a way of reassuring her that she has a future full of family and love during this time of despair and fear of the unknown. Side note, I love this particular theory a lot, which Violet Eyes Rhys explains beautifully in a Tumblr post, link in the show notes. Does the bone carver show what they fear most? Jurian being resurrected by the King of Hybern, meaning the king is able to wield the full might of the Cauldron and proceed with his deadly war, which Rhys is desperately trying to stop right now and he's fearful of. And for Feyre, a future that she subconsciously wants but will result in her, Rhys, and the baby's death instead if Nesta doesn't swoop in to save the day. We never learn what Cassian sees when he sees the bone carver, but there's a lot of theories that we'll dive into at the time, and the general consensus is that it's something he fears, like Lanthus or Bryaxis. Does the bone carver show someone who is going to die in the future? Like Nicole mentioned, he is considered a god of death and can foresee how people die. So does this shape-shifting ability directly tie into that?
Well, here's the theory. So shouts to Daniel real quick, who shared this when he was on the podcast for our bonus Maasverse episode. The theory is that the bone carver shows up as someone who is just about to die. The Jurian who Rhys sees is the one who's just about to fight Amarantha. Now, small side note, this is the last time Rhys saw Jurian as a whole person and not a jewelry accessory. But in ACOMAF, Feyre will see the bone carver as an Illyrian warrior, aka the biggest casualty during the war. And here, she sees her son. The first thought is obviously that this is Nyx. However, Nyx does have wings. Now, maybe his wings can appear and disappear just like Rhys, so maybe this is an 8-year-old version of Nyx. But like I mentioned, the theory is this is showing up as a person right before they die. So would that mean that 8-year-old Nyx is the latest Nyx is ever going to live?
No,
I'm so sorry.
No, don't you dare say that.
Or is this a different child of Rhys and Feyre's? We do know that this is their child because Feyre sees both herself and Rhys in this baby. There has been a lot of theories that it might be someone else. We can confirm this is Rhys and Feyre's baby. Now, to be fair, Nyx doesn't per se die, but he was on the brink of death during Feyre's labor. Jurian technically did not die. His soul was still preserved. So maybe this is just predicting someone who dies in a way or is close to the death. I don't know. Do I want Nyx to die? Obviously not. No. I don't want an 8-year-old child to die. That's terrible. But I do think that this is a really cool power of showing up as someone right before they die, especially if Cassian did see Lanthus, then we know that Nesta does kill Lanthus in Silver Flames. So it would be a really cool power. Just saying.
We'll continue wondering.
I don't want Nyx to die. I want to be
I think that it also ties into, the fate that is expected. And then, of course, that's where prophecy really can come in, where you can change the future that is laid out. So it could be that Nesta is the one who comes in and changes Nyx's future too. And so, again, the waters get very muddy when we start talking about this stuff, but it's always great to speculate. We'll continue wondering about all this as we do continue through the series, especially as the bone carver becomes much more prominent in ACOWAR. I'll say this for right now. My best guess is that what the bone carver appears as doesn't fit into any one box. It could be what the individual needs to see in the moment to help or hurt them. It could be whatever makes him most approachable or fearful, again, depending on the onlooker. And it could indeed be someone who will die, but also maybe that's just in some cases with the onlookers. I personally refuse to think that's the definite answer in all cases because I refuse to think that Nyx will die. And it could indeed be someone who will die, but maybe that's just in some cases for the onlooker. We really don't know.
Well, speculation aside, let's move into the scene. Because Rhys throws the child a bone from the Midgard worm's lair, and it is the one that killed the worm during Feyre's task. It is the final blow for this worm, which we need to just pause for a minute, because this is such a Rhys move to have taken one of the bones from under the mountain as I might need this later for the bone carver. It does make me wonder just how many schemes that Rhys has that just never come to pass. Like, his pocket realm is probably the full-blown room of requirement. Like, it is just filled with things that he's like, I might need this later. The bone carver asks if Feyre is frightened of him, which she says yes, because she's not allowed to lie. And his answer is Feyre. Feyre, he said again, drawing out the syllables as if he could taste them.
I know what that's like. Feyre. As I practice having to pronounce it correctly. I read that as like, yep, I will never be able to not read it in my own voice. Feyre.
I do want to point out, like, first off, way to make her less frightened, my guy. He's probably having a ball right now. Like, no one ever comes to visit him, and he's like, let me freak out some people. But when Feyre gives her name up to Amarantha in ACOTAR, Amarantha says, quote, Feyre, Amarantha said, testing my name, the taste of the 2 syllables on her tongue, an old ancient name from our earlier dialects. I bet you anything, I bet you $10 that this is what the bone carver is thinking here about the similarities in the syllables language with how he's like, oh, Feyre, that's an interesting name. Like, from the earlier dialects, I guarantee you that's what he's thinking. I guarantee you $10. That's what he's thinking.
And we need to point out, Fae-vorite does not give him her name here. He just knows. Same with her death under the mountain. He just knew. She did not provide him with that information that she died. He just knew. So from simply his introduction, we can understand just how powerful, mysterious, and ancient he is. The bone carver may not have clean, wonderfully cozy sheets, but hey, we can. However, did you know that traditional bed sheets can harbor bacteria that leads to acne, allergies, and stuffy noses? Well, Miracle Made offers a whole line of self-cleaning antibacterial bedding, including sheets, pillowcases, and comforters that prevent up to 99.7% of bacteria growth and require up to 3 times less laundry. I love that personally.
Using silver-infused fabrics inspired by NASA, Miracle Made sheets are thermoregulating and designed to keep you at the perfect temperature all night long, so you can get better sleep every night. And have you ever laid down for a night's sleep feeling like you're ready to live your sleeping beauty fantasies only to realize that your pillowcase actually kind of stinks? Well, Miracle Made bedding is infused with silver that helps them stay cleaner and fresher 3 times longer than other bedding. We love it.
Go to trymiracle.com/FF to try Miracle Made sheets today. And whether you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%. And if you use our promo FF at checkout, you'll get 3 free towels and save an additional 20%.
Miracle is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you aren't 100% satisfied, you will get a full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/FF and use code FF to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40% off. Again, that is trymiracle.com/FF to treat yourself. Thank you so much, Miracle Made, for sponsoring this episode. Let's take some time to go through our question for a question that we get in this passage. The bone carver is fairly intrigued by Fae-vorite, and since they brought this super convenient bartering bone, they are able to ask him a question for every question he asks Fae-vorite. Remember, this is why they needed to bring Fae-vorite to the bone carver in lieu of any other Inner Circle member. She is someone who the bone carver would want to ask questions given her resurrection. So the bone carver begins with his questions. Question number 1, quote, "Where did you go when you died?" After a deep breath from Fae-vorite, she answers that she heard her neck crack and, quote, "Rhys's head whipped toward me." I'm curious, is Rhys's head whipping over because he's shocked that she's speaking about it, given the fact that she's been obviously very traumatized by this? Or is it because he's shocked she heard her own neck crack?
My guess is more that she's talking about it because Rhys understands how much she tries to bury it down and not talk about what happened. And I believe he's seen her memories too. There was kind of like that description there about how they freely flow past her mental shields. While Rhys specifically brought her here to answer the bone carver's questions about death, I don't think he was fully prepared or even expected her to share this level of detail.
Fae-vorite goes on to tell the bone carver that it was dark where she died, but there was a thread, a tether, and she yanked on it. Then she was seeing through Rhys's eyes, and that's how she knew she was dead. As Fae-vorite is telling this, quote, "Rhysand's face had gone pale, his mouth a tight line. He knows that she's talking about the mating bond, but he also knows that she doesn't know she's talking about the mating bond. This is the first time he's realizing the parallels of his actions out under the mountain and what she experienced as a result."
And just how deeply she felt it too. She is describing holding onto the thread of their mating bond, holding onto him, holding onto her home.
Because it's time for us to pull this very moment from Rhysand's POV in chapter 54. I'm quoting the whole damn thing. Quote, "And I felt you die. And this beautiful, wonderful thing that had come into my life, this gift from the Cauldron, it was gone. In my desperation, I clung to that bond, not to the bargain. The bargain was nothing. The bargain was like a cobweb. But I grabbed that bond between us and I tugged." I love that both of them saw this cobweb/thread and they both tugged on this. But the bone carver moves on to question number 2. Was anyone there? Were you seeing anything in the beyond? And Fae-vorite tells him that there was only the bond in that darkness. That it was only when she followed the bond back, she knew that home was on the other end of the bond. Home and bond are so very important wording here. Again, from chapter 54 in Fae-vorite's inner monologue as she's hearing from Rhys. Quote, "Home had been on the other end of that bond, I told the bone carver. Not Tamlin, Tamlin, not the Spring Court, but Rhysand. Can you imagine being Rhys in this scene? What an out-of-body experience this guy must be having right now. He knew that they had a tether, but it was always him pulling on it, him using it. To hear that she wanted to return home, there must be some part of him here that's filled with hope of like, maybe, just maybe we will find our way together someday. Question number 3. Were you afraid? Her answer is that she wasn't. Or more, that there was no room for fear when she only wanted to, quote, return to the people around me.
She can't even say Tamlin's name, and she stumbles a little on her explanation of that return to the people around me. Because yes, she did want to return to Tamlin. Here's the paragraph she's describing from chapter 46 in ACOTAR. Quote, everything was black and warm and thick, inky but bordered with gold. I was swimming, kicking for the surface where Tamlin was waiting, where life was waiting. Up and up, frantic for air. The golden light grew and the darkness became like sparkling wine, easier to swim through, the bubbles fizzing around me. I love how she is saying these same descriptions like swimming and sparkling wine to the bone carver. And while yes, she was swimming toward Tamlin, she was also swimming toward life. Yes, italics for emphasis.
Life also has a double meaning here. Yes, it is swimming back towards life. She's not done with things yet on this planet, but also it's that life with Rhys returning home. I love that. Question number 4 from the bone carver. Was there no other world? Feyre is pretty simple with her answer, and she says that if there was or is, she did not see it. Immediately, we go into question number 5, which is, quote, no light, no portal. I love the use of the word portal there, especially given what we know about Amren. Here, Feyre almost asks, where is it you want to go? And honestly, it's a good question. It's super fair, but she holds off because she doesn't want to use up her questions on something like that. I do wonder if that legend that Rhys referred to earlier about people falling through rips in the world, if the bone carver was one of them.
Yes, so he most certainly is. From chapter 23 in ACOWAR, I have a great quote here where the bone carver explains when talking about his sister, the Weaver, and their brother, Koschei, quote, how they delighted in this world when we fell into it, how those ancient Fae feared and worshipped them. Had I been braver, I might have bided my time, waited for their power to fade, for that long ago Fae warrior to trick Striga into diminishing her power and becoming confined to the middle. Koschei, too, confined and bound by his little lake on the continent, all before Prythian, before the land was carved up and any high lord was crowned. So the bone carver goes on to say that he took it upon himself to find his way here to hide from his siblings. He wants to stay in the prison because he doesn't want his siblings to know that he is alive and in this world. But in reference to this question, I believe the bone carver is more genuinely curious about death. Like he'll go on to say, it's a rare day when you meet someone who comes back from true dead. Notice he never said he never met someone who comes back from true dead. I just wanted to note that there. But he really does just want to know, being a death god himself. Although he doesn't necessarily own up to that title, calling his siblings death gods instead. And it's Cassian who more labels him a death god, because he is one.
Question number 6. Did you have a body? And again, Feyre's answer is simple, no. And just then Rhys juts in with a, you're done. I do wonder how much of that was because he wants them to get their answers and have the time to ask their now 6 questions that they're owed, or because he knows that Feyre is sharing incredibly painful memories, and he's worried about her sharing too much more for not only him feeling all sorts of feelings around this, but also not knowing how much more she can handle sharing.
I think it's 2 things very much along the same lines that you're thinking here, Nicole. Number 1, he's protecting Feyre's well-being and doesn't want to put her in the hot seat more than is already necessary. And number 2, Rhys has got shit to do. He wants his questions answered too and is like, okay, chop, chop, our turn. We got stuff to do.
However, now it is time for Feyre and Rhys's questions to be answered. Remember, they are owed 6 questions. That is how many the bone carver asked them. Feyre's question number 1. If there is no body, just a tiny little bit of bone, could someone maybe, just maybe, grow a new body for them? The bone carver asked if the soul was preserved, and Feyre confirms that yes, it was. But the bone carver, being shady motherfucker right now, says, nope, there's no way. And you can almost feel Rhys's and Feyre's sigh of relief until the bone carver's like, unless The bone carver goes on to share that long ago, before High Fae and man, there was a cauldron. We told you this is a lore-heavy episode. This cauldron contained all the magic, and the world was made from it. But the cauldron fell into the wrong hands, aka we can assume the Daglin, which were this all-powerful rulers over the Fae and humans. And they used the cauldron to forge the Dread Trove.
The Dread Trove consists of 4 items: the crown, the harp, the mask, and an unknown item that we all know from ACOTAR has a gleam of age-worn bone. There were additional things created from the cauldron, like Gwydion, the magic sword, which got its powers when the high priestess Olenna dipped it into the cauldron.
There's one more. Narbin, which was a sword that was said to be even older than Gwydion, was made from the cauldron. But Amarantha actually got this Narbin into her possession, and when it would not bend to her will, rather than risk the King of Hybern getting his hands on it, she threw it into the depths of the sea. But that's all just a rumor that we learn in A Court of Silver Flames. And yes, you can almost hear the plot set up for ACOTAR 6 and beyond with that little drop of nugget info.
I totally forgot about that other sword, by the way. Totally forgot about it.
Well, because it's like half a paragraph. It's so, but it's like, oh, with that one sword, you could basically be High King. And it's like, wait, what? Anyway, back to the Bone Carver's download. Eventually, the cauldron was stolen back from this evil, we can again assume the Daglin, but it could not be destroyed because it had made the world and all things in it. If it was broken, then all life would cease to exist. Which, by the way, this right here, this is why Rhys sacrifices himself at the end of ACOWAR, because the cauldron was broken and Rhys, very on brand, puts himself in harm's way, aka sacrifices himself to protect his family and his mate and save the world. But so because the cauldron can't be destroyed, the only choice was to hide it away. But what does this history lesson have to do with resurrection? Yes, only the cauldron can resurrect something that is dead as long as the soul is preserved as well. That was all question number 1. Question number 2. Rhys asks where they hid the cauldron, to which this mischievous little bone carver replies, "Tell me a secret no one knows, Lord of Night, and I'll tell you mine." Mine. Rhys asked where they hid the cauldron, and the bone carver responds with, "I'll tell you my secret." That was very sus. Fae-vorite prepares for this horrible truth from Rhys, but what does he say? Quote, "My right knee gets a twinge of pain when it rains. I wrecked it during the war, and it's hurt ever since." Classic. And High Lord, might I introduce you to KT tape? The bone carver sees this as acceptable information, though, because he gives another huge download. He says that when the cauldron was hidden, it was hidden at the bottom of a frozen lake in Lapland. We have no idea where Lapland is because it's not on any of our maps in our books. However, Yaz the Bookish on Reddit, we love you, Yaz the Bookish, shouts to you, made a post on Reddit. They mention how one of the fairy tales SJM wanted to weave into the ACOTAR story is the Snow Queen. In the Snow Queen, there is a lake and a palace by a lake called Lapland, spelled differently, but there is ice there all year long.
Elsa?
Let it go. Where do we have a palace by a lake in ACOTAR? Kostj's lake. Is it possible that this is the lake the bone carver is referring to? Possibly.
Well, Kostj is the bone carver's older brother, after all, and where the Sixth Queen is cursed. So it's not far-fetched that the bone carver is indeed talking about Kostj's lake. We do not know that, but it is possible. At the end of the day, though, the point is moot because the cauldron vanished from there a long, long time ago, and the bone carver now has no idea where it went. But a millennia ago, the feet of the cauldron were cleaved from its base to spread some of the cauldron's power. That's, again, the feet of the cauldron just get me every single time. But it's not the most foolproof solution. Quote, "Removing the feet was like cutting off the first knuckle of a finger. Irksome, but you could still use the rest with some difficulty." The 3 feet were hidden at different temples. Remember how we were talking about this a lot last episode? Cessair, Sangrava, and Ithaca. Like I said, those are definitely some familiar names because at least 2 of those temples, Cessair and Sangrava, we know have recently gotten sacked, telling us that whoever is attacking and raiding these temples is indeed looking for the feet so that the cauldron can now be whole and be used at full power.
Question number 3, which is kind of a question. Rhys says, quote, I don't suppose you know who now has the cauldron. The bone carver's response is not an answer to this non-question because there's no question mark at the end of Rhys's sentence. It is a period. The bone carver requests Feyre's bones when she dies and then laughs because sure. He says, quote, no, I don't even think you would promise that, Rhysand. Feyre continues to think in her inner monologue, quote, I might have called the look on Rhys's face a warning. Hello, mating bond alarm. And Rhys, being like, ancient asshat, please do not tell her. Little does he know that it will actually be an ancient Google asshat, which will give up the ruse later. Rhys then turns to leave, which... What? They are on question number 3, and that's being generous since question 3 wasn't even a question. Is he wanting to leave because the bone carver almost gave up the mating bond and Rhys is like, abort mission, abort mission?
I think that might be part of it, but he's also like, okay, if the bone carver is done and just messing with us now, I'm out. Again, he's got things to do because like the bone carver will go on to say, Rhys does actually indeed know who has the cauldron. He's just looking for the bone carver to confirm it.
But Feyre is smarter than Rhys in this moment. She thinks to herself, quote, but if he knew, ... I turned again to the boy creature. She knows that he knows who now has the cauldron if the boy doesn't know where. We often think of Rhys as the cunning and intelligent person of the two, but really Feyre is showing that she is just as scheme heavy. She is just as think ahead as Rhys can be.
That's interesting because I saw this as more of her being really desperate. Rhys kind of knows, again, that he knows where the cauldron is and who has it and is like, fine, I can figure out the rest on my own. But Feyre doesn't have that same context as he does, and she wants to do her part to do the best that she can. And so she's like, all right, fine. Like, I got to keep giving it my all. She's given A for effort, so to speak here, because she's so desperate for this information and wanting to do a good job.
Feyre tells the bone carver that there was a choice in death. There's that word again, choice. She goes on to tell him that she knew she could either drift on into the darkness of death or choose to fight. She came back from death so that she could fight to hold on a little longer. She knew she wasn't done with this life. There was still things that she knew she was called to do. She was destined to do. This right here is a big neon sign to us readers as to why she was so infuriated, I'll call it, with life at the Spring Court. She chose to come back from death so that she could do things to help people she knew she wasn't done with. And she was told to sit still and look pretty.
She also says that there was something good waiting beyond that dark. Something good. This is so impactful when you think of Rhys. No, she did not actively know she was choosing to get to go back home to Rhys, to a life with him. But the bond knew and helped guide her toward recognizing there was good on the other side. Good meaning Rhys.
She also knew that she wasn't ready to go into death alone. There's that foreshadowing for the eventual bargain she will have with Rhys to leave this world together. We will debate the feelings we have on that particular bargain when we get to the end of ACOWAR. The bone carver sees this as sufficient info. Quote, you know who has the cauldron, Rhysand, who has been pillaging the temples. You only came here to confirm what you have long guessed. The King of Hybern officially has the cauldron, and we can assume the feat, if not most of the feat, at least. The bone carver goes silent, waiting for another truth from Feyre and Rhys. Can I just say, might I remind us that they've only gotten 3-ish of their questions answered. They are getting hustled by this kid right now. This is wild. But Feyre obliges, sharing how she planned to turn the dagger on herself after she killed the third fairy in the third task under the mountain. And quote, Rhys went still.
Feyre is offering up information for the greater mission, yes, but I imagine this is also healing for her to say these truths out loud, specifically where they do have a greater purpose than her just admitting them to herself, if not consciously, then subconsciously. She is sharing these truths for someone else, for the greater purpose, versus for, I'll say, her own selfish needs that she is still having some difficulty sorting through here. And I can see how that is particularly healing for her, just with that mindset of how to share and why to share.
Well, speaking of, the bone carver is, yes, terrifying. But he's also a neutral party member. He is locked in a cell, and she supposes she's never going to see him again. He seemingly, again, subconsciously, might be considered a safer person to share these dark memories / secrets with than anyone living out in the wild, specifically the inner circle, people she's seeing every day, people she works with. It doesn't mean that this is not emotionally exhausting, which obviously it is. She will immediately want to go to sleep when she gets back to the townhouse. But it's like an emotional hangover after a doozy of a therapy session. It's like, I feel good sharing all those things, but it doesn't mean I'm like hunky-dory. It means you have that emotional hangover. Fae-vorite goes on to share that it wasn't until she was dead that she decided she wanted to live. And quote, I dared to glance at Rhys, and there was something like devastation on his beautiful face. It was gone in a blink. Rhys hearing this cements for him just how close she was to ending her life. He got a glimpse in last episode when she was thinking how it might be a blessing just to be ended. But here he knows that it wasn't just the guilty aftermath. It was something that she's now been considering for, unfortunately, a long while. This was over 3 months ago.
She knew even while she was doing these horrible things that she was going to kill herself. It was a premeditated suicide because she knew that her soul was broken and there was no going back after this. And she did it anyway. She murdered these fairies anyway for the good of everyone else. And it wasn't until she was gone and dead that she realized she still had fight left in her. I think she might be hinting a little at fate here again, knowing she hadn't finished whatever it was that she was born to do. Nicole even used the word destined earlier. She was born to be Rhys's mate. She was born to live by his side. She was born to save Prythian and be High Lady.
Fae-vorite later thinks, quote, as if he, Rhys, suspected but never believed just how badly I'd broken in that moment with Amarantha. The bone carver, hustler extraordinaire, deems this information worthy and tells them that with the cauldron at full power, with all 3 feet in it, it could shatter the wall. Well, fuck.
Dun, dun, dun.
He goes on to share that possibly King Hybern has been learning the cauldron's secrets for years and possibly resurrecting Jurian. The bone carver doesn't say Jurian, but we know as the reader Jurian is just a test to see if the feet are working. Lol. But then he will let it rest and restore its power again to do something really bad, like shatter the wall that the King Hybern has hated since he was forced to sign the treaty 500 years ago. Fae-vorite finally asks question number 4. Again, the bone carver had 6 questions. We're now on question number 4. Quote, is there a way to stop it? The bone carver is silent for a minute, and Rhys tells Fae-vorite not to offer up any more piece of info. But his warning is not necessary. Remember, you still have 3 more questions. It's fine. Now, it is odd that at the end of, is there no way to stop it? There is no question mark. There's only a comma. So this might not be considered question number 4 if we're looking at this grammatically, but the bone carver is just spilling the tea because he likes them, apparently, and he's heard some juicy stuff and he wants them to come back.
I do believe it's more of the tone of the question with how Fae-vorite is so worried about what she's learning. So yes, she is asking the question, is there a way to stop it? And even though there's a period instead of a question mark, it's more insinuating her tone and how she's really freaked out about what they're learning about here.
That's fair. So this is officially question number 4. Remember, they still have 2 more left. The bone carver obliges and does another download of info. Buckle up, people. When the cauldron was made, there was a little bit of molten ore left over. And so the Book of Breathings was created. And in this book are carved the spells to negate the cauldron's power and the spells on how to control the cauldron's power. However, only those who are made can wield the power of the Book of Breathings because, and I quote, like calls to like. The count begins with number 1 right here. But after the war 500 years ago, the book was split in 2. One half went to the mortal queens and is purely symbolic as an element of the treaty. And remember, only those who are made can speak the spells and summon its power. Because of this, the High Lords at the time were like, this book is basically useless to us. So since why one half went to the mortal queens, because no one born a Fae could use it.
Well, and the cauldron has been lost for a millennia, and now it's just a myth. So it makes the real value of this book essentially essentially lost, hence why it was more of a symbolic nature. The mortal queen's half of the book is protected so that it must be given to someone by one of the queens themselves. If it was stolen or tricked or any kind of magic was used in trying to retrieve this half of the book would melt on sight and then it would really be useless.
The other half of the Book of Breathings, however, went to the High Lord of Summer, and it is protected with spells from the High Lord of Summer's blood himself.
But hey, guess what? Now there's someone who exists that was indeed made, and the cauldron is back in business. So suddenly the Book of Breathings, it's not just symbolic anymore. It is extremely vital to saving the world.
To be fair, Amren has always been around. So technically Amren could have always been using the book, but it's been split. There hasn't really been a need until now. So we finally get our adventure of the story, we'll call it. Simply reunite the two halves of the book and nullify the cauldron's power, all before the wall gets shattered. That's the info we needed, Bone Carver. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Life is so full of stressors, moving to a new court, dealing with a breakup, having funny, fuzzy feelings for the most powerful High Lord. And we all have stressors, big or small. And if we don't address those stressors, it can have real effect on our mental health and our relationships. I see you, Feyre. Therapy is a safe place to get things off your chest and to figure out how to work through whatever is weighing you down.
I actually just started therapy myself last month because, well, for a lot of reasons. And it has been so helpful to have a trustworthy therapist to help me navigate big emotions, communicate my feelings and my needs, and help me on this journey of wanting to be the best possible mom, a successful business owner, and a loving wife. It's already helped me feel more centered and in tune with my own thoughts and feelings. And I really look forward to this me time I've carved out every single week. Nicole has literally made it part of my work schedule because I was putting it off because I didn't feel like I had the time. And I'm so grateful that I am taking care of myself in this way now.
I'm so proud of you. I'm just beaming over here. Oh my gosh.
I know, it's a big deal.
If you are thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's so easy to get started. BetterHelp is entirely online and gives you the opportunity to participate in therapy from your own home on your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime at no additional charge. Listen, we're all busy. It's not always feasible to go and visit your therapist in person on a regular basis. BetterHelp makes showing up for yourself so easy.
Get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/FFG today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/FFG.
As we return to the townhouse, we get our first official Inner Circle debrief. And I love seeing how each of our crew reacts to Rhys's info dump from the Bone Carver. Asriel is the one who asks the most questions. Honestly, it makes sense given his role, but considering how quiet he's been, it's kind of like, whoa. Cassian is super quiet, quote, as if the general understood that the Shadow Singer would know what information was necessary and was busy assessing his own forces. I love seeing specifically these two's minds at work, because we've really gotten a lot on Mor and Amren and their place in the court, but now we're getting to see Asriel and Cassian too.
It's so telling how much and how long they've worked together, that they know the ins and outs of one another from just, again, centuries of being a team. And I love those little nuggets that we do see here with that. I also love how Rhys says, quote, "It seems we need to start doing what we do best." I'd love to hear what else the Inner Circle has been up to for the last several centuries, you know, before Amarantha. Like, what is it that I mean, like, I know that we know what they do best, but like, what other adventures and things have they done here? I want to know.
Oh my God. I want
the adventures
so
of the Inner Circle.
I feel like that would be a comic book, like the adventures of the Inner Circle. I love that. Oh my God. So Rhys's diabolical plan is such: retrieve both parts of the Book of Breathings. In the meantime, spy on the King of Hybern and learn where the cauldron is. This way, so that when they do get the two halves of the book and they crack the code, they can move swiftly before people find out that they have both halves, because that would be very bad. Then, once all of that is done, sneak into Hybern and either steal the cauldron or nullify it with the Book of Breathing spells. Simple! That's all they need to do. But how do they retrieve both of these halves? Like Lexi mentioned earlier, the queens have to freely give their book. So because of that, they need to meet with the queens on some neutral territory, not on the continent where they rule, because if Feyre so much as even steps foot there, she will be hunted, most likely because of her powerful nature. Feyre realizes the neutral territory Rhys is referring to is her family's estate. I understand from Feyre's POV why this is a definitely neutral place, but if I was a queen, I would be like, this is not neutral. This is very much not neutral, considering one of the people, this is their old home. But I guess they explain why it's neutral in the letter.
See, I think given the circumstances, it's about as neutral as it possibly can be. Feyre, being the compassionate person she is, she's hesitant to bring this burden onto her family, specifically her sisters. But as more will point out, the burden is coming to them one way or another. So we might as well be proactive about it.
That's true. Then we have the other half of the book, which is in the Summer Court. Since the object is spelled individually to Tarquin, it can only be found and therefore retrieved through his unique power. Thank goodness we have Feyre, darling, because she has a kernel of Tarquin's power. I love how Rhys describes it as having these 7 powers is almost like having 7 thumbprints. It's those metaphors to make it so comprehensible for us. Meaning that if an object calls to a certain High Lord, like this half of the book calls to Tarquin, it will also call to Feyre since she has that thumbprint. But we cannot just take the Bone Carver's word for it. It's time for horror show monster number 2 in this stretch, because Feyre has to test this theory by locating a certain objects of Rhys's that he has been missing for a very long time. To quote Asriel, to the Weaver. Now, it is interesting that the Inner Circle is pretty against this idea at first, and I'm guessing that they don't know the significance of this ring. But I do think that they know Rhys is crushing on this girl, and they're like, why the fuck would you send her to the Weaver, Rhys? Like, what are you doing, my guy? Rhys turns to Feyre and, quote, to let me choose, always. It was always my choice with him these days. Choice? Absolutely, yes. And he is also pushing her to be her own savior here. He's nudging her towards these situations where she will be able to conquer her fears.
I will say he is nudging her toward this choice that helps his own agenda. Some of the ACOTAR fandom feels this is manipulative behavior on Rhys's part. And while I see their perspective, I am going to say that I do believe he is doing this for her best interest. Yes, Rhys benefits from it, but ultimately all he cares about is Feyre's well-being, her awareness of her own power and ability, and helping her heal. This is how presenting choices that are essentially go big or go home. That's also just simply the situation that they're all in here. There is a war quickly approaching, and they are all actively trying to stop it or at least lessen the damage, which means stepping out of your comfort zone big time and having to make really big choices or to stay home.
Feyre brushes this off with a, it can't be that hard joke. And while Cassian and Moore kind of laugh off the joke, quote, only Rhys, it seemed, understood that it hadn't been entirely a joke. His face was tight, like he knew precisely how tired I was, how I knew I should be quaking at the thought of this Weaver. But after the Bone Carver, after what I revealed to it, I could feel nothing at all. While he can see her slowly coming back to herself, she is still in the first stages of healing. He can see that she's exhausted and that she only has so many spoons for a day, which if you don't know the spoon analogy, it is primarily connected to people with chronic illness representing their energy. Every day, we only have a certain number of spoons to give out. When people are out of spoons, they are out of energy to give. So they have to distribute their spoons wisely. Feyre just gave all of her very few spoons right now in her depression to the Bone Carver, and she's got no spoons left, and Rhys is the person who recognizes it. Hello, mating bond hint. Before Feyre goes to nap, though, she gets a promotion. Day 2 Feyre. Lisa from marketing would be so proud of you. I'm so happy for her. She gets the title Emissary to the Human Lands, to which Asriel is like, wait a second, Rhys, there hasn't been one of those in 500 years. But Rhys's retort is actually what gives me pause. Quote, there also hasn't been a human turned immortal since then either. First off, who was the emissary 500 years ago, I wonder?
So I was thinking it could even have been more, since she was allied with the mortal queens and fighting with them during the war. However, You'd think she would have said something about having had that position. But again, who knows? It could also be somebody totally separate, because that was before Rhys was the High Lord. So it was probably one of his father's inner circle people, and Azrael was his spy master. So his father could have had somebody totally different be the emissary to the human lands as well. In fact, I'm definitely leaning more towards that. I don't really think it was more, because again, she would have said something, but just fun to speculate.
And secondly, who was the last human turned immortal? We can assume it was Miriam here, right?
Yes. So here is the text about it. I'm just going to read the whole thing. Quote, "She bled out while she was carried to safety, but Draken knew of a sacred hidden island where an object of great and terrible power had been concealed. An object made by the Cauldron itself, legend claimed. He brought her there to Cretea, used the item to resurrect her, make her immortal." All right, everybody, hold up. So Draken used the object to resurrect Miriam, which granted her the Fae long life in the process. I don't believe we know what this object was. I really tried searching for it and I couldn't figure out what exactly it is. But I'm kind of inclined to think it was a dread trove. It fits the description of being of great and terrible power that was made by the Cauldron itself, but I don't see how it could be one of the three in this world. Like, from process of elimination, the only one I can think of is the crown, but again, it doesn't fully line up. The power of the crown is controlling people, not resurrecting the dead. The best power description actually would be the harp, which, is hidden in a sacred and hidden island. So that does also meet the description, but the harp is very much hidden until Silver Flames. So I'm not sure.
Well, and also the harp is not in Cretea. It's in the prison. What the fuck?
But Draken knew of a sacred hidden island. I wasn't sure if it was like he went to the island, got the object, and then took her to Cretea to resurrect her, or if the Cretea was the island.
And then he put the heart back afterward. He was like, you did your purpose. I'm going to put you back to go back night-night.
That's actually a really good point, is because, so I don't think that it could be the harp, because that is deeply hidden in the prison, and Draken wouldn't just go and get it, take it to Cretea, and then take it back.
He wouldn't be able to take it because he doesn't have access to the prison. So it would have had to been Rhys, and
very
actually,
true.
500 years ago. So this would have had to been Rhys's dad letting him in.
Yes.
This is really fucking with me.
So bottom line is that the description that we hear about Miriam being resurrected and becoming immortal does fit in line with a dread trove. However, none of the dread troves that we know of would make sense in the lore that we know of. And I've also learned my lesson where you can always learn more about lore and world building and find out new information. So we don't know, but I just wanted to point that out.
I don't know what you're talking about at all, Lexi. Next, we move into the scene where Rhys is helping Feyre get ready for the Weaver. I love every single morsel of this scene. But before we get into that, Feyre starts putting the pieces together of just how far ahead Rhys plans out in advance. She's realizing that her reading lessons were not only because, yes, it is a necessary skill. Rhys does admit that. But it was also because she is made. Rhys does mention that if she had agreed to work with him earlier, meaning when she started her reading lessons, she was still living in the Spring Court 3 weeks out of the month during that time. Would Rhys have just taken her to the Bone Carver and to the Weaver on their 1 week and then she was just going back to the Spring Court and not being able to talk about it? I would have given her maybe 3 days back in the Spring Court before she yeeted out of there. Imagine how useful she would be in the Night Court for 1 week and then going back to the Spring Court and being nothing but a pretty trophy bride. She would have been out of there so fucking fast. I love that.
Oh my God. Think about how good her shields would have to be too. Holy moly.
Well, considering that Tamlin and Lucian don't shield at all and they don't really do any of their own mind work, whatever, I think she would have been in fine company.
I think about it more as she would have to be lying her face off to them. And that would be more of them being able to scent her line and whatnot. So she would have to really put on the performance well before she does in ACOWAR, which that's a whole other story. But anyway,
that's a really good point. And then, quote, Rhys knelt and spread wide the web of leather and steel, beckoning me to stick a leg through one loop. Ladies and gentlemen, I've waited 11 episodes. It is my time to shine. Rhys is here putting his hands on her thighs, and Feyre is over there trying to just like ignore the feeling that Rhys is all like touching her. You know that Rhys also, he's kneeling. He's right in front of her. He is like, think of baseball, think of baseball, think of baseball, think of baseball. However, as Rhys is kneeling before her, I'm feral in this scene. Oh my God, I'm like sweating. Feyre remembers a time where he made Tamlin bow in front of him and quote, "Now here he was on his knees before me. His eyes glinted as if he remembered it too." Rhysand has 2 tattoos on his knees of the Night Court insignia that symbolize how he will never bow before anyone or anything but his crown. And while Fable will remember that particular moment in chapter 55, you also can't help but think about it right here on a reread. He is kneeling before her, quite literally. But I will put a pin in that for right now, because let's discuss why Rhys can't get his own damn ring himself. Number 1, the Weaver knows him, and if he's caught getting it, it would be a steep price. I'm assuming that means his life. Number 2, the High Lords are never to interfere with the Weaver because of the laws that protect the Weaver herself. Anyone who steals from her on behalf of another High Lord either doesn't return or is never sent out of fear of being led back to that particular High Lord. But isn't that exactly what Feyre is doing here, you might ask? Correct. However, because she has some of every court in her, there's no way of being tied back directly to the Night Court. She's basically one confusing little puddle. I do have a question though, because doesn't Helion go to talk to the Weaver / Striga in ACOWAR on behalf of Rhys?
So yes, he most certainly does. My best guess is that Helion was going there to make a bargain on behalf of Rhys, a bargain that will free the Weaver. That's key there. So even though it's technically not allowed for A, High Lord to go to her, and B, a High Lord to send someone else to her, this has some wiggle room because it's to the benefit of the Weaver. But the main reason Rhys can't retrieve the ring himself, it's not just a test for Feyre in regard to tracking the Book of Breathings, although that certainly is part of it. Oh no, Rhys's mother gave him that ring and then took it back to give to the Weaver. And whenever Rhys was going to get married or have a mate, then the female would either have to be smart enough or strong enough to go back and get it. And if she couldn't get it back, then hey, she would not be strong enough to survive the marriage and survive essentially being with Rhys for the rest of eternity. And he promised his mother that any potential bride or mate would be put to the test. This is Rhys literally upholding a promise he had to his mother. Hey mom, I've got a mate. I'm going to go send her off to go see how she does with getting that ring back. So here you go, Feyre darling, your test from Rhys's mother. Personally, it sure makes me extra happy that my mother-in-law passed down her wedding ring diamond to my husband to propose to me, and I didn't have to, go to the Weaver to get my beautiful ring. All right, friends, we are at the Weaver now. But before we dive into this Weaver chapter, let's quickly explain who the Weaver is. I know we touched on her a little bit in regard to the Bone Carver, but she, of course, deserves a spotlight too. So the Weaver's real name is Striga, and she is an immortal death god with immense power who feeds on life itself. Her twin is the Bone Carver, and they have an older brother, Koschei, and they fell into this world from another dimension. After they arrived in this world, they were seen as gods by the ancient Fae, and they were worshipped out of fear by these Fae. Striga particularly delighted and reveled in this worship. She feasted on people's life forces and used their deaths to keep her body young, strong, and powerful. But then a female Fae warrior tricked Striga into diminishing her power and confined her to the middle in a small cottage in the forest. That's when Striga became known as the Weaver of the Wood. She has been unable to leave this piece of land of her own free will, and she has been imprisoned there and alone. High Lords cannot interfere with her, and the treasures she collects will probably never be retrieved because, hey, the High Lords do not dare get caught. How does she get these treasures? I mean, besides Rhys's mom giving her a ring, I have absolutely no idea. But if a High Lord sends a thief, that thief never returns. But again, the High Lords prefer not to send anyone, again, out of fear that it'll be traced back to them. The Weaver has moon white skin and long onyx hair. While her body looks young, her skin is actually wrinkled and withered, and her eyes are rotting black pits, which means that she's blind, making her other senses extra lethal. I assume when she is not able to feed on life and therefore stay young, she begins withering like this, even though she is immortal and cannot die. Because she's in the middle for so long, Striga has not had people to consistently feed on, and it's starting to show in her appearance. No offense, girl. By the way, is anyone else getting Rapunzel's mother Gothel vibes here, right? With the flower and the singing and the hair and all that? Yeah, me too. The middle is full of the meanest, strongest, and most cunning creatures. And hey, the Weaver is right at the top of that food chain, aka she's the big bad monster in the middle, and everyone fears her. So naturally, Rhys takes Feyre to go to her.
Our crew winnows to the woods that were, quote, older and more aware than any place I'd been. God, I love that writing. And we are officially back in the middle because this is also where the sacred mountain Amarantha just defiled and made her court that last book. This is where our girl Feyre has already spent 3 months. If the Weaver set up a store selling all of those trinkets she's hoarding, you know what? She would make bank. You know that sound? It's the sound of another sale for the Weaver with Shopify. Shopify is the easiest way for small businesses to sell their products across the world, online, in-store, and over social media.
Shopify is a game changer for anyone trying to make their own small business dreams come true. And it doesn't matter whether you sell online or in person. Shopify POS is your command center for your retail store. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify has everything you need to sell in person. With Shopify, you get a powerhouse selling partner that easily unites your in-person and online sales into one source of truth. Track every sale across your business in one place and know exactly what's in stock.
Shopify helps you drive store traffic with plug-and-play tools built for marketing campaigns from TikTok to Instagram and beyond. Get hardware that fits your business. Take payments by smartphone, transform your tablet into a point-of-sale system, or use Shopify's POS Go mobile device for a battle-tested solution. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. Do retail right with Shopify.
Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/FFG. All lowercase. That's important, folks. Go to shopify.com/FFG to take your retail business to the next level today. Shopify.com/FFG.
Before we go to this death trap, these two lovebirds share some interesting chatter, but let's walk through this flirtation, shall we? First and foremost, Rhysand starts off with a choice. He says, quote, "Who knows? With Cassian, he's probably more interested in fucking you than protecting you." This is a bold move, my guy. Rhys is leading her to think about sex with Cassian. Cassian is hot. Like, we cannot forget that. And I say that as someone who, Rhysand is my number one book boyfriend of all time. And Cassian's still really fucking hot.
It's kind of like Rhys is playfully testing Feyre. Yes, there is a specific purpose behind his flirting, but he's also feeling out how Feyre feels about his brother and her own sexual desire. Meanwhile, if this was me he was testing, I would just fail miserably and go just jump into Cassian's arms. But that's just me. And Nesta, apparently, as well.
Well, not necessarily. Nesta, she's a tough nut to crack for Cassian. I meant that sexually pun-wise. Anyway, Rhysand does not stop there. He eggs her on and says, quote, "If you needed to move on in a physical sense, I'm sure Cassian would be more than happy to oblige." I do have another thought here, another thing to ponder other than him just feeling out and being like, "Do you like my brother? What do you think?" I do wonder if he's also trying to make her think about having sex with anyone other than Tamlin. Like, not to actually do it necessarily with Cassian, but to just mentally move on. You know, like when you go through a really hard breakup and you're having to imagine your life without that person now, after making all sorts of plans and also after picturing your life being a certain way or whatever. I think he's trying to open up her mind to what that might look like sexually. And of course, hoping that it's actually him who will get to reap the rewards.
Yep. I think he's absolutely also reminding her, without outright saying it, that she's not bound to Tamlin anymore. He says, "You could, you know." Yes, he doesn't really think she's going to jump Cassian's bones, but he is assuring her it's okay if she wants to. I mean, it would shatter Rhys's heart into pieces, and Cassian may already suspect that they are mates. I don't think that Cassian would actually follow through with it, but the point here isn't specifically about Cassian and Feyre. It's to let Feyre know it's okay to want company. It's okay to move on. It's okay to have those desires.
Feyre plays along, though, telling Rhys to let Cassian know to come to her bedroom tonight. She is also starting to crank up that flirty banter. Maybe not to the level 5,000 that Rhys is at right now, but like, let's say to a level, like 1,500. She's really starting to crank it up. Rhys goes on to say, though, quote, I'll let Cassian know you're open to his advances. That long pause is really one of two things here. Number one is the subtext that he's actually meaning himself. I am open to your advances. Or number two, a little bit of jealous / primal mate Rhys thinking that she's actually going a little bit too far and he like cannot stomach the thought of it, which I do have to state, like Lexi said, Cassian would never, because he knows how hard his brother is crushing here.
And also just like Rhys and Feyre's game of chicken is officially beginning here.
Speaking of, Rhys then goes in with the line that deeply impacted like thousands and thousands of book readers. Quote, did you enjoy the sight of me kneeling before you? I am giddy. I am thrilled. I am so happy to be talking about anything romantically that does not have to deal with Tamlin. I'm so happy. I'm kicking my legs in the air. It's so funny after talking about fucking Cassian. He's like, nope, think of me sexually. Thank you.
For extra emphasis, he grips her chin as he says those words. Oh, he is just dialing it up, and I am here for it. Gotta love how Feyre replies back to brush it off and put herself back in control of this exchange, but her words are tight and near breathless. As she'll reflect, they are playing a dangerous game now, but she needs this playfulness and she's meeting him blow for blow, maybe not as smoothly as him, but I can't fault you, Feyre. He is the king of smoothness. This is a good way to channel her anxiety and be distracted right now. And at the same time, she's starting to play again and lighten her words, her attitude from darkness and feelings of nothingness, and it's evolving into something here.
I guess we are done with that for now, though, because we have reached the Weaver's cottage. Let's describe this cottage, shall we? She lives in a small white cottage with a thatched roof and a half-crumbling chimney. Feyre thinks it looks so ordinary that it's almost mortal. Quote, it might have been the sort of place I would have stopped if I were thirsty or hungry, or in need of shelter for the night. You cannot read this and not think of the story of Hansel and Gretel, who went into the woods, saw a cottage made of candy, only to be lured inside by a witch who was going to cut up and eat them, but she ended up being pushed into the cinders instead. Good old children's story, that is. But this creepy-ass children's story comparison is so stark on the pages to immediately make us readers put our guard up for this absolute horror show that is about to play out. Feyre is walking towards the cottage and she's tapping right back into her hunter mode. Quote, falling into a pattern of movement that some part of my body, some part that was not born of the High Lords, remembered. I love that here she is remembering a power that was not gifted to her, but one that she honed and crafted over years. It is something that wholly reminds her of her own powerful nature.
And she's identifying that mortal part of her, acknowledging it, and I'll even say letting it come along for the ride, but she's not listening to what it tells her to do. This cottage is a perfect, pretty trap. She knows that, and her instincts are telling her, hey, don't go in there, but she keeps stepping toward it because, hey, she is Fae now. She is more powerful. She knows that she can face this now.
She thinks about this pattern of movement of being like waking up. Since coming to Velaris, she's talked about being tired and constantly wanting to sleep, symbolizing her depression taking over her. But here, that waking up language is Feyre coming back into her body and remembering, again, a skill that belongs to her, not high Fae Feyre. It's that human Feyre, like Lexi was saying. But that waking up causes her to think that, quote, I was not a mouse. I was a wolf. I love this. I love that this I was a wolf language is Feyre's I will not die today mantra. It just makes me so happy. As Feyre gets to the cottage, she hears a creepy song that the Weaver is singing. This is a song about two sisters who are walking by a river. One pushes the other one in and watches her die. That sister's dead body floats down the river, hits a dam, and someone finds her and makes a viol out of her. By the way, a viol is a stringed instrument most commonly associated with a violin. However, it can also be described like a harp-like instrument. Then after this weird violin body maker adds her tongue to the instrument, the viol says that the sister drowned her. Wow. So This sent me on such a rabbit hole of research. I learned that the Weaver song is based off a popular 17th century banger murder ballad, The Twa, or The Two Sisters. In The Two Sisters, there is a third sister, but she is rarely mentioned, which is ironic that it's called The Two Sisters, which all of the Twa, or The Two Sisters story, again, 17th century banger murder ballad, was the premise that SJM adopted into the Weaver song. A huge shout out to @byJessicaMason on TikTok, who has a video explaining how the Weaver song is connected to the Two Sisters and how Lorena McKennett used this 17th century banger to turn it into a 1994 banger, The Bonnie Swans, which ironically is actually on our ACOTAR Book 1 playlist.
That is so ironic and completely by accident.
I know. Now, this creepy song could be just that the Weaver is singing, a creepy song. Of course, though, the internet has some theories about its connection to the Archeron sisters. Educational_smoke 805 on Reddit thinks the Two Sisters is about Feyre, the youngest sister, who was pushed into the water by Nesta, the oldest and darkest sister, when they were going out to see their father's ships. Then the younger sister is made into a viol, which again could be like a violin or a fiddle. And educational_smoke 805 even mentions how the third sister, who plays no significant role, is there to represent Elaine. LOL. Drag her.
Well, that I'm not going to open up this can of worms right now, but there is a popular theory out there that Elaine is actually not related to Nesta and Feyre. And so that could potentially be tying into this very vaguely.
Oh my God. Now, this, going back to this one where it is Nesta and Feyre primarily, it could very well be it, especially given the tie that the younger sister was made into something by a random man who picks up her dead body to symbolize Tamlin, aka the fiddle. But some other lines of the Weaver song that also emphasize that it might be related to the Archeron sisters. The opening line is, quote, "There were two sisters that went playing to see their father's ships come sailing." Father's ships. Hello, Papa Archeron, foreshadowing and symbolism. When the viol starts talking, it says, quote, "Oh, yonder is my father the king," and quote, "Oh, yonder sits my mother the queen." Feyre compares her father to being rich as a king. This also could be heavy, high fae ancestry hint, possibly. And lastly, I love that the viol can be interchanged with a fiddle, a violin, but also a harp, tying it back into Nesta. Enough about my creepy rabbit hole songs and bangers. It is time to go back to Feyre, aka Hansel and Gretel. Feyre walks into the main room that has floor-to-ceiling shelves lining the walls, and it's covered in everything from books, dolls, herbs, poetry, shoes, candles, crystals, more books, jewels, etc. So much. Basically, the Weaver needs to be submitted for an episode of Hoarders. But it is noticeable that Feyre isn't able to feel anything that's pulling her. Because remember, Rhys hasn't told her that she's looking for a ring. She's going in totally blind here, necessarily. He literally picked the smallest freaking thing and didn't tell her what it is. And it makes sense for the mission, but Rhys, it's a very Rhys move.
All right, and so now what is the Weaver doing? The Weaver is spinning someone into thread. What? What do I mean by that, you ask? Well, it's honestly all very vague, so I'm going to do my best to explain. The fiber she is feeding into the wheel is white and soft, like wool, but definitely not wool, and instead it is from a creature or person. Somehow, the Weaver's power includes spinning creatures and people into thread, and then with that thread, she weaves on her massive loom. So today is spinning day, not weaving day. Feyre seems to notice the dangerous difference with the Weaver in the two activities, but I'll be honest, I personally don't understand. Moving on. What we do know is Feyre can literally smell a, quote, strange, fear-drenched scent that comes from these bolts of fabric. Why does the Weaver weave? Well, we know that she feeds off life, like we've mentioned several times, so I'm assuming it's related to that, as maybe an alternative for how to sustain her long life in this lonely cottage prison she's in. She still gets her hands on people who, wander into the woods or who go after her as those thieves, don't get me wrong, but she only became the Weaver once she arrived here, so it's got to be something to do with how she preserves the life that sustains her, and she can somehow create threads of their lives and weave their lives, including their bodies and skins, into this fabric. What does she then do with the fabric? I have no idea. Does she wear the fabric? That is that's usually what you do with fabric. Or does she eat the fabric? Like, does she literally eat them that way? It seems like a silly possibility, but she is named the Weaver, so I don't know. That's my super vague explanation there.
What has this episode done to us? Anyway, Fae-vorite thinks that this test is going to be just a huge fail because maybe she's not connected to the High Lords, and she thinks of it as a blessing. I really love that Fae-vorite isn't written as a character who just leaps into the unknown and doesn't look back. She has fears, she has doubts and reservations of believing that she is as powerful as she is. She is so freaking relatable. I love her.
Because if she is able to feel the High Lord power, that's a lot of responsibility on her for this upcoming war. And while yes, she absolutely wants to help, that's a lot of pressure on her shoulders, and Fae-vorite's not really sure she's ready for that much responsibility in stopping the upcoming war.
But that I don't feel anything feeling doesn't last very long because as Fae-vorite thinks, quote, Rhys and I were one and the same. What is the next paragraph? Quote, I felt it then, like a tap on my shoulder. I love this. Right as she thinks of them being similar, which hello mating bond hint, that is when the object calls to her, almost saying, quote, hello, have you come to claim me at last? This line hits so much different when you know the story behind the ring. The ring is a family heirloom on the mother's side that has been passed down from female to female for generations. It has twisted strands of gold and silver. We love a multi-metal ring, flecked with pearl, and is set with a deep blue stone. His mother gave it to Rhys to remind him that she is always with him during his Illyrian training. Then she took it back so that he wasn't reckless and gave it away willy-nilly. I love that. I think about this in being like, you know, his like early 20s, and to quote Cassian, when they just wanted to fucking fight. Just so it's like, don't be an idiot and give this to some woman. Like, I just see her doing that so much. And it's important to note that this was also before Rhys's sister was born. Instead, she actually took it to the Weaver and said that any future wife or mate would have to be smart enough to steal it, or else she wouldn't survive the marriage, like Lexi said earlier. So that have you come to claim me at last is so heavy with meaning. It's almost like as if Rhys's mom is speaking to her. She has come to claim it, yes, for the good of the mission, but she's also claiming her own wedding ring, proving to Mama Rhys that she is strong and smart enough to last a mating with the head of the Night Court.
But Fae-vorite is really having to fight her inner demons already, because as she not so seriously contemplates stabbing Rhys, her PTSD rears its ugly head. And something that was a toss-away thought now has her spiraling, thinking about how the blood would dribble out, how she knows exactly what it is like to stab someone. But she pushes through it and shuts out the thought, even though the memory is still haunting her as she compares her quiet hand to a final dying breath.
Just as Fae-vorite picks up the ring, the Weaver ends her song. And as Fae-vorite is counting her steps left to reach the door, the Weaver's wheel is slowly beginning to stop. The writing here is so good because with the countdown of the steps interwoven with the wheel slowing down, it just highlights the suspense of a moment. Like, you know, in a horror movie, I don't really know this because I don't watch horror movies, but you know, like the moment right before something jumps out and scares you, it's like this like really slow, quiet moment. That's exactly what this is like. When the Weaver asks, who's in my house? Do we think that she senses all the powers of the High Lords within Fae-vorite? We know the High Lords are not supposed to come to the cottage. Especially since later the Weaver asks, quote, what are you? What, not who. And then she goes on to think, what is like all but unlike all? So I really wonder if she feels this power of all seven courts and was notified by the power, like the ding, 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 something's here that's not supposed to be. But she was also confused because she's never felt anything like Fae-vorite.
Yeah, it didn't seem like she realized Fae-vorite was in the house until she took the ring. So I don't know how, but the Weaver must be able to sense the objects. And when the object is picked up, she knows someone is there, obviously taking them, which is why Rhys said not to touch anything else. And the Weaver's probably puzzled because she would usually recognize this power that is, you know, within her vicinity. But Fae-vorite, being different and new and familiar all at once, was able to enter her home undetected and get to the ring undetected. But yep, once that ring is picked up, the Weaver automatically knows something of hers is being taken, and she zeroes in to focus on Fae-vorite, and now that she is alert to her, she recognizes and realizes that she is indeed familiar but different. Familiar because of the High Lord's powers, remember that thumbprint metaphor, and at the same time, something new. She's made by the High Lords, but not any one power or High Lord. And our poor girl Fae-vorite starts getting really overcome with fear. She remembers what it was like to be a helpless and weak human, But at the same time, she's actively pushing through that fear, embracing it to remember what it was to want to fight and to live, to be willing to do anything to stay breathing.
And as terrible as a situation this is, that right there is one of the major benefits of her going here. She is remembering what it is like to fight again. And it's very different circumstances from where she was last episode, where she was thinking it would be merciful to be dead.
She even admitted to the bone carver that it wasn't until her life was truly at stake, or rather already gone, that she chose to fight. That when push comes to shove, Feyre really truly does want to survive and fight back and live to see another day. And on a much smaller scale, that's happening here too. She is facing death in the face, like literally the Weaver is a death god. And even though she knows things are pretty hopeless, she's going to try her damnedest to survive this encounter.
Feyre goes on to think that she doesn't want to die or to be eaten. Quote, I don't want to go back to that sweet darkness. I love that darkness tie-in because that is exactly what she described as the afterlife to the bone carver. Honestly, this is a rough 2 days for Feyre to face these horrible two creatures basically back to back. Woof.
And then the next day she has to face her sisters, which, let's be honest, Nesta at this point in her story is more scary than the bone carver. Maybe not as much as the Weaver, but definitely more scary than the bone carver.
Definitely.
I don't know, Feyre, this new job is pretty intense. We all know what it's like to have a first crazy few days on a job, but your first few days on the job, Feyre darling, it really might take the cake.
Luckily, Feyre is made of stronger stuff, though, than we are, because she taps right back into those similar instincts that saved her from the Midgard worm under the mountain, and she lunges for a burning candle. She sets the wall of woven thread on fire, which, go girl, but this is not just a survival tactic. She throws it at the wall of woven people and, quote, let them be free. This is our Gryffindor coming back to life again. I love it. She seizes her opportunity, though, and runs to the chimney and begins to climb.
I just gotta love that she doesn't hesitate. Again, Feyre is in full-blown survival mode and she can't second guess herself or she's toast.
Literally.
Or technically fabric in this instance.
But quickly realizing that her immortal strength can only get her so far and that she is now so much weaker. This is the wolf language immediately going, gone. She thinks about how back in the spring court they had made her weak. And Feyre begins to freak out fairly. Not helping by the fact that the Hansel and Gretel metaphor is coming back to play, because guess what the wall is filled of? Cooked fat. Delightful.
She thinks how she's going to die in here and be eaten, and her thoughts completely spiral out of control, picturing exactly how she might be eaten. Then immediately thinking about the first trial and, quote, I'd barely escaped, barely. I couldn't breathe.
SJM has opened up about her own experiences with anxiety and depression and her familiarity with anxiety attacks. Sadly, you can so tell with this style of writing. It is written just like the start of a panic attack. Her mindset shifts from I was a wolf to they made me weak. Then she moves into this is my death sentence language. Then the couldn't breathe language. And it all comes to head with a commanding stop. This is like a mental slap out of it or pull yourself together. And what I love is it's not an immediate shift of thought. She has to remind herself stop twice before she's able to tell herself breathe, think.
The voice comes out of the darkness of her mind, but it is clearly her own voice, her inner self buried deep down that knows who she is, what she's capable of. I love how this statement is that her voice was her own, because darkness of my mind might allude to Rhys, but this is entirely Feyre, and her inner self is having to convince her spiraling present self to get her shit together and have even a shot at this, aka breathe and think.
She's shifting her focus so that she can start thinking of moments where she was strong, moments that she had survived, which allows her to then remember that, oh, that's right, I now have super high Lord strength. Quote, I was strong. I would not be weak or helpless again. I could not be broken, tamed. I love this. It's her, again, taking her power back from those who forced her to be weak. I love that full circle from the start of the panic attack. And she uses this moment to break open the wall of the chimney and escape. Not without throwing a brick at the Weaver, though. And just blood starts spraying. But we'll talk about that later.
Feyre escapes. Huzzah! Huzzah! Huzzah!
And she finds Rhys. She's completely covered in hair, fat, smoke, chimney rubble, the whole nine. And she has the Weaver of the Wood running out of her house screaming bloody murder. Like, where are you? Where are you? And what does concerned mate Rhys say? what the hell did you do? I have a piece of dating advice for Rhys. If you see your girl storming towards you, completely out of breath, looking like Feyre, maybe, just maybe, look slightly concerned. And don't ask what the hell did you do, because you 100% deserved the retort back of you from Feyre. Because A, what the hell was Rhys doing? Like, he must have been worried. His body language obviously suggests otherwise, but he is a mate and he just sent his mate into the Weaver of the Wood. You'd think he'd be nervous. And B, instincts are always to save your mate. So I'm guessing that he was looking at this as another way of saving her, like saving her soul. He later says you found a way to help yourself. So I think he's looking at it as like the greater good. But Rhys, my guy.
I am dying because I have such a different take, and I think that this is really reflective on how different our two husbands are. And who we married, because I think that Rhys is super surprised and just genuinely curious and intrigued. He's like, damn, I knew you had it in you, but wow, like what happened? He knew there's a good story to this. And imagine how many times he, Cassian, and Azriel have been in some kind of crazy situation. That's, of course, the first reaction one of them would have with each other if they were, again, in a similar situation here, which you know that there's been some kind of similar situation before. It's Rhys showing he's comfortable around her. It's, again, like it's exactly what I would say to Jake if he was in the exact same situation. It's what he would say to me if he was Rhys and I was Feyre. And it's not coddling. It's just blunt accusations expressed with love and curiosity and pride. Well, Brett would be like, oh no, honey, what, are you okay? Like that would be his first thing. And absolutely. Jake would be like, what did you do?
They winnow back to the townhouse and he grabs her waist and notably cups the back of her neck in order to winnow. Cupping the back of someone's neck is a pretty intimate touch. So here's my headcanon, Lexi. I think he was worried. And this is him pressing her close to his body to calm down that primal part of him that needs to know that she's safe.
I absolutely think that too. Like he knew what he was doing when he sent her into the Weaver. Like, don't get me wrong. And I'm sure that there was a little bit of worry, but I think that it was more so pride and curiosity.
That's fair. Feyre and Rhys arrive back with our inner circle.
And once again, we have to note the different reactions of Cassian and Amren, who are the two who are present here. Amren cringes at Feyre's scent and comments that she smells like barbecue, which, yeah, girl just scaled a chimney. Amren is unfazed by what is going on with Feyre. She's more just disgusted, which that absolutely tracks. And the first description we get of Cassian is that he loosened the hand he'd wrapped around the fighting knife at his side, showing that, yes, he's lighthearted and jokes a lot, but he's the commander of Rhys's armies for a reason. He is first and foremost a warrior and a protector.
And as Feyre is going off on Rhys for not doing anything when she needed help, his only answer is, quote, "You found a way to help yourself." And I honestly agree with Amren. Brutal, but effective. And as all of this is happening, Feyre slams the ring down on the table and Cassian locks his eyes on it and swears. I think that this is the moment that Cassian starts suspecting that it's not just his brother crushing, but no, this is his brother found his mate, because he probably would know the significance of that ring from his time with Rhys and his mom and all that kind of stuff. And he would know that Rhys was going to send his future wife/mate to the test. And here it is, Feyre saying, I got it.
I'm not sure if he knows the full extent of why Rhys needed Feyre to go and get it, though. Remember, he was against this idea just the day before. He also follows up with, "You're a prick, Rhysand." But then, of course, he shrugs in agreement because he would do the same. And I just love everything about this Illyrian so much.
I don't think that Cassian knew the ring was with the Weaver. I think he just knew the significance of the ring, period. And he didn't know that the ring was with the Weaver.
Yes. So he didn't know like that full story, but yes, he did know the sentimental value. And then once when Feyre brings it forth, he's like, oh, we're here. Yeah. Okay.
I remember the moment when you told me that you have found your future husband. And I think my exact was like that exact. I was like, oh, okay. It was that exact reaction. After ripping Rhys a new asshole, Feyre turns to Cassian and tells him that she wants to learn how to fight. Quote, "I want to know how to fight my way out. I don't want to have to wait on anyone to rescue me." I love that. This is her choosing to train, not someone else telling her she can train.
Yes, I love it so much.
This is her also choosing strength and to be her own savior. She fought the Naga last book. She captured the Suriel. She went under the mountain. And yet there was still a part of Feyre who did feel like a damsel in distress. She admits to Rhys on the top of the House of Wind earlier that Tamlin was the person who showed her kindness and safety and how that worked for her then, but not anymore. Now she is the type of person who chooses to learn how to fight and protect for herself rather than have someone else be her protector.
And isn't it interesting that Feyre is owning this after she saved herself and protected herself under the mountain? Well, at least with the Middengard worm, she did get some other help though. In the Spring Court, she knew what she was capable of. She would tell Tamlin and Lucien all the time in her attempts to convince them to let her do something, anything. She's like, hey, I've done a few things here. Hold up. Yet, even while she was there, she trusted them to know what was best. Remember how she asked the Inner Circle last episode if her training would send the wrong message? Again, the exact same language from the Spring Court. And now, after experiencing an incident where her only choice was to run, Feyre is tired of feeling helpless. She never wants to feel weak again, especially when she knows what she is capable of. Never again, that same kind of language there. Side note, I love how Cassian doesn't look to Rhys for approval. Even though the circumstances of how training is presented are very different, this is so different from Lucien, who was having to beg for Tamlin's approval. And Cassian, even though he knows that he has Rhys's approval, so to speak, he doesn't have to look at him. He doesn't have to ask his permission. He just goes for it.
Feyre might not need to search for a trainer, but most of us do rely on the internet to search for all kinds of services or products. As small business owners, we really want it to be easy to be found and give a great first impression. That is where a website comes in, which is why we are thrilled that this podcast is brought to you by Squarespace.
Whether you're just starting out or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything from products to content to time, all in one place, all on your terms. We've actually been building our own new website with Squarespace, and I am truly blown away by how user-friendly it is for people of every website skill set.
My favorite part of using Squarespace is Squarespace Blueprint, a tool that empowers you to start a completely personalized website, but still chooses from professionally curated layouts and styling options. Easily launch your website and get discovered fast with integrated, optimized SEO tools so you show up more often to more people and grow the way you want. For all our fantasy fangirls out there who are selling your own products, shouts to you. You're amazing. Squarespace's client invoicing allows you to easily manage your clients and invoices, letting you receive payment via invoices in one streamlined, customized workflow.
Squarespace really can work for anyone. Like in our case as content creators, video is a massive component to what we do. With their video collections, you can upload video content, organize your video library, and showcase your content on beautiful video pages.
Head to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/FFG to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much, Squarespace, for sponsoring today's episode. Feyre is ready for a bath and a nap. However, Rhys has other plans, telling her that training her powers is now considered part of her job description. I do want to point out that this is after her saying to Cassian that she wants him to train her, and given the fact that they were just joking about Cassian and her fucking earlier, I 100% believe that these are for her to be able to take her powers, make them her powers, her own, and empowering her to be her own savior, yada, yada, yada. But you have to admit the timing is a little interesting that he's like, you're training with Cassian? I want you to train with me too, Feyre.
And I think we're both on the same page where it's like, yes, and he's also really seizing the opportunity when Feyre is particularly open to training in any capacity. He knows that she has to train these powers at some point or they will probably eat her alive. Might as well start when she already starts her training to fight.
And training starts now.
I love how when she protests, Rhys tells her what she's capable of, like heating up the bath herself. Let's pause and remember, Feyre had always been a human before, with zero powers, obviously. This is a whole new way of thinking for her. It's not just about using her powers, but being able to simply comprehend what she can do on the day-to-day as a Fae with powerful magic. It's so foreign to her because she's never experienced this before. And Rhys not only is going to help her train, but help expand her mind into understanding what she can use her powers to do, even something as simple as keeping making her own bath hot.
Rhys tells Feyre to try to get past his shields, but after she denies him, which I mean fair, even though Amren magicked it away, she still is coated in the remnants of people fat and hair. I get it.
But gross. It's so gross.
But Rhys, being ever the Ravenclaw, leads the conversation to something Feyre would naturally want to know the tea on. Ianthe, and how he is surprised, quote, she didn't carve you up on an altar to see what that power looks like inside you. And look, it's effective. It's an effective mode of conversing because Feyre asks what his problem is with her. But nope, he stays quiet because she has to get past his shields and then he'll show her the deets. He does tease her with a little bit of info, though, on the high priestesses infiltrating certain courts dawn, day, and winter with spies and followers and whatnot. However, the high priestesses remained hidden during Amarantha's reign and they escaped being under the mountain. Which, wait, all of the high priestesses escaped or just dawn, day, and winter? And where did they go?
Well, this is one of those fantasy fangirl moments where I read this part and realized I should have read further ahead than the last section to offer up more concrete information when we were talking about the high priestesses. And I hate it when I say incomplete information or ask questions that literally get answered in a few chapter stretches, because yes, they entrenched themselves in these courts before Amarantha's reign. And it was not just Ianthe's family who fled, but apparently most of these high priestesses who burrowed themselves in these three courts. And we should note, Ianthe learned from some of these high priestesses. Yes, some of them are compassionate and selfless and wise, but then there are others who are wolves around a carcass that Rhys described earlier.
When Feyre asks about Ianthe, Rhys continues to remain quiet, egging her on to try to get past his shields. And she utterly fails, but not for lack of effort. And just for trying, Rhys allows her through his shields. And I love this description of what they look like. Quote, they went on forever, the product of half a millennia of being hunted, attacked, and hated. By the way, these shields are also adamant. Yes, that is the same fake fantasy metal for Feyre's shield. His shield, quote, like a mountain cat arching to the touch, it seemed to purr, and then it relaxed its guard. The purrs. Perfect. God, I love it.
It fits Rhys so perfectly with his feline grace, but not just like a kitty cat, a mountain cat. Rawr. An extra powerful cat.
I don't know. Miko's pretty ferocious.
Miko's mean to my poor dog. Actually, no, now they have a truce because now their common enemy is my children. So.
Feyre enters the memory with the bond going taut. Again, there's that language, the bond going taut. I love this. As she goes in and sees a completely naked Ianthe spread wide on Rhys-Anne's bed.
And we readers and Feyre are like, oh shit, hello. And not in the good way, kind of surprised. Feyre literally tries to leave the memory.
But Ianthe is not here by invitation. This memory is our first real peek into her ambitious nature. We've had a feeling since the first few chapters of the book, but here it is as to how freaking far this high priestess will go to reach her ambitions. Rhys debates splatting her on the walls. I'm pissed you didn't, my guy. Especially since last night, in the memory last night, she was so forward with males in his court that she made Asriel so uncomfortable that he had to leave. I'm guessing it was like a party, that he had to leave the party. Poor Asriel. When Rhys says that her allegiances lie with other courts, Ianthe responds with, quote, my allegiance lies with the future of Prythian, with the true power of this land. And I got to admit, she's consistent. Her priorities have not changed. She is still wanting to rule over Prythian and calling it for the greater good. Ianthe ups the ante, though, mentioning how their union, her and Rhys-Anne's union, their children could rule over Prythian, and how she didn't see anyone else who would be worthy of this position. I'm literally like rolling my eyes right now because she will literally go after anyone with a remnant of power. Might I remind you that she went after Asriel and other members of the Night Court literally last night. But what other High Lords do you think she's given this speech to? And did any of them fall for it?
Well, I do think she specifically had her eyes on Rhys as her first priority, being the most powerful High Lord in history. And when he says no, she moves on to the next. However, I will say that doesn't explain how she was stalking the other males right under his nose. But yeah, we do have to remember Tamlin is a powerful High Lord. Not nearly as powerful as Rhys, but more powerful than Tamlin's father was. And with how powerful Fae-vorite is, it wouldn't be Ianthe's own offspring, but Ianthe had quite a bit up her sleeve with this Tamlin and Fae-vorite union, and Ianthe being their bestie and essentially godmother, taking the baby under her wing. And somewhere in there, working with Hybern to take over, because again, we cannot forget that part.
This high priestess, completely naked, struts over to Rhys and begins to reach her hand between his legs. This is sexual assault. This is terrible. Like, launch you into oblivion, Ianthe. Terrible. But thank goodness Rhys's powers catch her hand, and he threatens her to never touch him or any other males of his court again, or else the next time he breaks her, it will not just be her hand. Brava, Rhys. Brava.
It's iconic that Fae-vorite will break Ianthe's hands next book, finishing the job that Rhys started here. And he says right now that her hand will heal. Fae-vorite makes sure that it can't be healed after she's through with her, so Ianthe can most certainly never touch another male again. I will say I wish Rhys just killed her right there. He's very seriously considering it, but think of the equivalent of, it'd be too much paperwork. So he banishes her from his court, though he knows that she'll be a problem now and later. Yes, she will, Rhys. Last thing on this memory, the descriptions of Rhys's mighty power within him. It's so fantastic. So much power, so easily controlled, roiling around her. Fae-vorite is so new to her power. She's not connected to it, but Rhys, oh ho ho, he's so easily in control of this great power. He's had centuries to hone it and learn how to use it to his best advantage and make it an extension of himself.
Leaving the memory, a clearly charged Rhys from reliving this time in his life, he tells Fae-vorite the 2 rules for entering a Daemati's mind. Rule number 1, only enter if you hold the way out, because a skilled Daemati can trap you in and make you their willing slave. That's not terrifying or anything. And rule number 2 is to be prepared to see things you don't like. Just like here. Fae-vorite wonders after seeing this side of Ianthe if she'll make advances on Tamlin now that she, Fae-vorite, is gone from the Spring Court. And I have the same question. I don't think that she went as far to make a full pass like she does here for Rhysand at Tamlin, but I definitely think she's felt it out, but then gave up and figured it was a lost cause and then started focusing on Lucien.
I'm curious if she ever did make a pass at Tamlin before everything with the Amarantha, like what you're saying right here. She was on the prowl a century ago. She still had 50 years to get cozy with Tamlin before Amarantha took over. And we know her father is closely tied to Tamlin. There's even speculation that he is, I'll say, the equivalent of the captain of the guard. Or did Ianthe go straight for Lucien because she doesn't want to deal with Tamlin's temper, especially if it doesn't go very well after what she experienced with Rhys? I'm just very curious what happened in those 50 years leading up to Amarantha.
Fae-vorite goes on to think how Rhys almost kills Ianthe here, but then 50 years later, he did exactly what Ianthe wants to do to him here. This is so true to Rhysand's nature. He didn't get with Ianthe to gain power, but he did whore himself out to Amarantha to protect those he loves from facing any pain under her rule. The last thing I want to say on the scene is that Fae-vorite, as she's in the bath, she's thinking about this memory and how she acted as if she had complete ownership over Rhys's body. And then the bathwater goes suddenly cold. This is gorgeous show of Fae-vorite's powers manifesting. The next morning, we have a hungover Cassian and Azriel, which is just my favorite thing. Quote, some small part of me wondered what it would be like to go out with them. Just last episode, she was wanting to avoid people and sleep instead. And here she is wondering, not yet wanting, but wondering what it would be like to go out with them and experience partying. On your way to healing Fae-vorite. Tequila shots at Rita's. Later, Fae-vorite is getting ready with Mor in her room, and they're talking about mortal clothes. Mor mentions how it wasn't so poofy skirts and modest attire 500 years prior. And Fae-vorite agrees, thinking that with the fairy threat remaining above the wall, why didn't they stick to practical clothes that would have made running easier? I'm assuming they're meaning like tunic and pants. She wonders what changed to make it so poofy and floofy. And I'm wondering that too. And I'm wondering if it was influence from the queens. Like they're like the influencers of this day, apparently, in my mind.
I think it goes back to humans not living very long compared to Fae and forgetting through the generations. What's above the wall becomes more like stories and myth than active threats where they feel they should be on their guard through the generations. Now, yes, over the last 50 years, Amarantha's creatures were attacking more, but that was an anomaly. family, and their reaction isn't to fight, but to just hate the fairies all the more and do what they can to protect themselves against that magic and creatures. But again, over the centuries, they've built their own culture with values and fashions and society expectations, forgetting about what was important 500 years ago.
Feyre says how most women in the mortal realm now wed, bear children, and then plan their children's marriages. And Mor begins to open up and share her story, or at least the beginning of her story, because her family is very similar to that of the human realm. In the Court of Nightmares, female's virginity is guarded and sold off to the male who bids the highest and hoping that it will advantage their family. Mor was born the strongest of anyone in her family. That is huge. Her family could literally smell her power on her, just like they smell High Lord's power and how it could be spotted by others. When she was 12, she prayed that because of this power, she wouldn't be married off because no male would want a woman this powerful. However, when her period came at 17, the full force of her power awakened in her. Quote, "And even that God's damn mountain trembled around us." Whoa, cool. However, her 12-year-old prayers went unanswered, and the people of the Court of Nightmares wanted her power bred into their bloodline. When Feyre asks about her parents' reaction to their daughter, the most powerful in the family, someone who made a mountain literally tremble, being married off only to push out babies with this power into a bloodline, Mor's only answer is that her family was beside themselves with glee because they could have their pick of alliances with another powerful family. Whoa. Mor's full story of being dumped in the Autumn Court and Eris and all of that will have to wait for another time. And honestly, we still apparently don't know the full story because Eris has got some secrets with it too. Because then Mor changes the subject to telling Feyre that she isn't coming to the human realm this round, and she says that she doesn't think she'll be able to behave well with others. This gave me pause because this is coming from chipper, open-armed to Feyre Mor. Is she specifically thinking about how she's not able to play well with the other Archeron sisters because of how they treated Feyre when they were in poverty?
I kind of wondered that too, but I also wonder if being around the humans is a little too triggering for Mor still, after all these centuries since her love, who was a mortal queen. But the way that she says ... behave with any others does make me inclined to think it's a little more directed at Feyre's sisters. Except Feyre hasn't shared her full story yet, so how does Mor know? Is it, I gotta wonder, is it a component of her power of truth? We have no idea. I'm just throwing that out there. She says that Cassian gets it, which still only confuses me more. Cassian gets her not wanting to go to the mortal realm because of her and his platonic relationship and just how well they know each other, where he doesn't need to ask questions to just, get it? Or does he get it, understand specifically why she feels like she can't go? I have no idea. So moving on. We talked a lot about this last episode, so I'll simply highlight how prominent it is here on the page with Feyre recognizing Mor's strength. She wants to hear Mor's full story because there is, quote, a special strength in enduring such dark trials and hardships and still remaining warm and kind, still willing to trust and reach out. And Feyre needs to hear that, know that there is hope and possibility and a light at the end of the tunnel. Nesta will need to hear that story too for her own healing journey, but it won't be from Mor. In fact, there's actually some issues between her and Mor, because Nesta has to find her own found family, and she'll find this inner strength in that story within Emery and Gwen, who will give her hope and friendship to find the light within herself. That's such a common theme throughout this series, specifically ACOMAF and Silver Flames, and I just love how the scene is pivotal for Feyre and Mor to connect.
Feyre, now completely dressed and ready to head out, looks at herself and she has a crown speckled with lapis lazuli. Gem watch! Lapis lazuli is associated with royalty, strength, and courage, which that royalty really raised an eyebrow for me. This is the same gem that she is wearing in her crown during her first night dressed like a heathen god's plaything under the mountain. Not necessarily the same crown, but the same jewel used within the diadem. Also, she is always wearing a crown when at Rhys's side in more formal settings. For instance, the Hewn City, meeting with the queens, under the mountain when she's Rhys's date, which I really think is Rhys like planting those high lady seeds right there. Mor makes no comment on Feyre's outfit though, and Feyre thinks that if she'd even worn nothing but her underwear, Mor would have told her to own it. The difference between this and the spring court, wow. There, clothes were a way of controlling Feyre. Here, she can choose whatever she wants to wear and she will not be judged for it. And if anything, she'll be encouraged to wear whatever she chooses.
And shock of shocks, Feyre wants to look good. She wants to wear the outfits, but only on her terms and what she specifically wants when she wants it.
Mor's parting words to Feyre have become some of the favorite of the ACOTAR fandom. Quote, "There are good days and hard days for me. Even now, don't let the hard days win." This line is exactly what Feyre needs to hear in this part of her healing journey. But it is also what so many of us need to hear at times too. We will have different chapters of our lives, some of which are wildly fun and joyous, and some can break us down to lows we didn't know we could hit. It's one of the many reasons stories are here for us in these darkest times. I know for me, a few years ago, life felt unbelievably heavy. And I was listening to Harry Potter over and over and over again because that was my way of escaping and tapping into a part of myself that felt joyous and comforted and magical. But it wasn't just the epic tale and the magic. It wasn't all the epic tale and the magic. That was pretty cool. But mostly it was the very real things that the character said and experienced that I needed to hear and feel as well. And this is no different. We know many listeners have reached out to us saying that they're in very dark chapters of their life. So let this be your and all of our collective reminders. There will be good days and there will be hard days. Don't let the hard days win.
I literally started crying as I read this in the outline and when I was going through it myself, just knowing how many hard days there have been for myself and still pushing through because there is always light. It's so beautiful. This is such a beautiful phrase.
But now let's move to flying towards the human realm. Feyre chooses to fly with Asriel instead of Rhys or Cassian. The first time I read this book, I was like, why? And honestly, I am still wondering. She mentions that Rhys's hands are too powerful and seductive. But then why not Cassian, especially given their budding friendship over the dinner table in the dining room? But is it because Rhys made the like you and Cassian can go fuck joke? Is this more of a story choice so we can get more time with the bat boy who hasn't been on the pages as much? But also I wonder if Asriel suspects about Rhys and Feyre's bond yet. I'm assuming yes because of his powers. And if that's the case, was he like, why am I carrying your mate? Like, why am I carrying this girl who you're crushing on? This is weird.
I think that Feyre is actively trying to convince herself that she's not attracted to Rhys. And this is her way of going in the most unexpected direction. Yes, I do think that it is an author choice to give her more time on the page with Asriel, especially with the beautiful heart-to-heart that they're going to have. But she's also trying to separate herself from sexual desire and flirtation and all of that. And Az is the safe option, so to speak. Not the one she's teased about being open to in bed, and definitely not Rhys. So she's distancing herself from any of that and kind of to herself saying, I'm not ready for that yet. And she's just kind of throwing them all off in the process.
That makes a lot of sense. Asriel scoops her into his arms and Rhys frowns. I love jealous Rhysand, even though it is his brother and he knows nothing would ever happen between Feyre and Asriel. But I do think that there is that jealousy, yes, because Asriel is carrying her, but also because she made the choice to be with Az and not him. I would fly with you, Rhysand. I would fly with you any day.
I still love how he snorts. Like, he and Feyre are still playing this game, even if she flies with someone else. Like, again, it is this game of chicken that they're both like full blown in right now. Okay, so pause. There is some confusion about why Asriel doesn't winnow more often because he is indeed capable of it, as we learn later on. My best guess, without scanning lots of text, because at this point I had already done my due diligence with the bone carver and the weaver, is that he can winnow short distances. But they're heading to the spring court right now, and that's about as far as it gets with winnowing. So Rhys is the one who has to do it because obviously he's the most powerful. So Asriel needs Rhys's help for this winnowing mission, so to speak.
There is also a time where his winnowing is described as like his shadow singer way of winnowing, where it's almost like his shadows are moving throughout the world rather than he's moving throughout the world like two pieces of cloth. I think he can winnow short distances, yes. But I also think that with his shadows, he can also travel in a different way than only winnowing and flying. But we're going to keep an eye out for that. As they're flying south, they pass by the Spring Court's western sea border, and Feyre wonders if Tamlin is there. This is such a relatable moment for us as readers. You know when you break up with someone and you're like terrified of running into them in your neighborhood and you're like on high alert, alarm, like constantly looking out for them? This is that moment.
I have such a crazy story about how I ran into my ex, the Italian stallion, at a basketball game, which neither of us ever went to anyway. And it was so random and I did not expect to see him there. And it was so jarring. And of course, I was with my now husband and my roommate at the time, but Jake hadn't arrived yet. So it was me and my roommate, and then I had an empty seat next to me. So the Italian stallion left his seat and came to me and sat down and started chatting me up. And again, this is a gigantic NBA stadium, and we were a few rows away from each other. And then Jake arrived and he tapped him on the shoulder and told him that he was in Jake's seat. And the symbolism behind Italian stallion having to get up, being very awkward in his goodbye, and Jake sitting down next to me. Oh my God, I will never forget it. And Jake had the biggest, the smuggest look on his face. And he loves to still tell that story to this day.
I can picture that so perfectly, and that makes me unbelievably happy. Oh my God.
Yes.
They get closer to the wall, feeling its abhorrent power, and Feyre says to Azriel how she understands why, quote, we were deterred for so long. And we do get more insight to Azriel and his character. He mentions in response to Feyre's, quote, I don't really know where I fit in anymore, with I've been alive almost 5.5 centuries, and I'm not sure of that either. Feyre's had a chance to bond with Cassian over being cold and starving, and with Mor over being a powerful female that's looked down on by others. But now she sees her lack of belonging in Azriel. It is also interesting hearing this from Azriel, that he doesn't fit in anywhere. We know as an Illyrian, but does he also not fit in as a member of the Inner Circle? And what do you think this means for the future of his story, without us getting on 45 minutes of predicting ACOTAR 6?
I'm going to go back to how he holds himself to impossible standards, and he struggles with his self-worth, not unlike Cassian and Rhys, but for very different reasons rooted in his childhood. I think he's referring more to belonging to a people like the Illyrian or the Fae, not so much his family here. But I do also want to point out he has been in love with Mor for centuries. And while that doesn't exactly disrupt the Inner Circle dynamic, he doesn't have a person to call home like other characters will experience here. And so I think that when we think about the future for his story, that's really going to be a big emphasis, is him finding his home in another person, his mate, whoever you are.
This chapter ends with them crossing the wall and flying toward, quote, the human lands, my home. It has been over a year since Feyre has lived in the human lands, and yet she still calls them my home. The Spring Court is no longer home. Valaris hasn't sunk in as home yet, but was this ever home for her? Not to mention with the welcome she's about to get. Let's not forget that.
It's more of her mortal heart, the mortal part of her still feeling connected to the human lands. She cares for the human lands in a way that none of the others can, and she's actively trying to protect it. Like, that's what she thinks of when times get tough. She's doing this for her family, to protect her human family. Yes, all Prythian in the world too, but first and foremost, her family, and that is what makes this home. While we already highlighted so many key foreshadowing moments, let's turn our full attention onto foreshadowing for the rest of this book and other important moments throughout the series.
When asking what would happen if there was a time when Azriel, Cassian, and Mor are all dead, Rhys says, quote, if that day ever comes, I will find a way to break the spell on Amren and unleash her on the world, and I'll ask her to end me first. While Rhys does not necessarily unleash Amren at the end of ACOWAR, it's something that she does for herself, it is also a very big turning moment in the battle with Hybern, and Rhys does not fall long after. Her crew leaves the prison. The bone carver picks up the worm killer bone and says, quote, I shall carve your death in here, Feyre. He will not, though, because the Bone Carver will die at the end of ACOMAF. When determining that neutral territory is Feyre's family's place, Feyre thinks about the horrors if the King of Hybern or one of his commanders gets his hands on her sisters. And yikes, because this will happen. Thanks to Ianthe, who, while not a commander of Hybern, she is working with him, and they will take her sisters and turn them into High Fae.
When Feyre is getting ready for the Weaver, she tells Rhys that she'd like to be notified of any future schemes. But Rhys does not honor this and puts them in a huge fight after the Adder attempts to take her away. Be's bad, Rhys. When talking about Rhys's mom's ring, Rhys says that she gave it to the Weaver for safekeeping so he wouldn't waste it. Let's focus here on that wouldn't waste it element of this. This is, of course, referencing how she gave it to the Weaver for safekeeping and for Rhys's mate/future wife to retrieve it as a test of her strength and intelligence. If she could get this ring from the Weaver, she would be worthy and equal to Rhys, so, quote, he wouldn't waste it. It not being so much the ring itself, but the symbol of the ring, who he gives his love and life to. It's actually a little sad if you think about how much Rhys's mom and his father were not right for each other, even though they were mates. This is her way of ensuring her son's mate is not just his equal, but can be happy with Rhys, truly be his equal in every possible way, including when it comes to strength and cunning. And then, of course, Feyre's response to, him not wasting it is nonsense and idiocy. Oh, Feyre, darling, you'll learn the truth soon enough.
When Mor explains that she will go to the human realm when it's time to meet with the queens, she says that she wishes to see if she can recognize any of her long-dead friends in their faces. Well, Mor did have a secret affair with one of the mortal queens during the last war, from whom the Golden Queen, Demetra, will be a descendant of. It is time to sip some tea with a Suriel. Every episode, Lexi's going to take a pause, have some tea, and walk us through a world-building topic to help us better understand the world and the people in it.
Today's Suriel topic is the prison. What we're learning here today will be a great foundation as we continue with a lot more theories and lore surrounding the prison throughout the series. So today we are sticking with the basic facts about the prison. Now, this Suriel topic is a little tricky because there is lore about the prison elsewhere in the Maasverse. So to be on the super safe side, I am dividing this into two parts. Part 1, sourced from ACOTAR only, and Part 2 is sourced from a different book, and it will be at the top of our Maasverse Madness segment. If you are like, I don't care about lore spoilers, give me all the prison info, then please feel free to listen to Part 2 after our favorite moments. But if you're like, nope, I want it all to be a surprise, then here's Part 1, and you can safely dip out before Part 2. Thank you all so much for working with us as we navigate being mindful of spoilers for everyone and catering to their needs. Okay, let's get into it. First, an explanation of what the prison is, where it is, and how to access it. It is, shockingly, a prison where the foulest, most dangerous creatures and criminals in Prythian are kept. The prison is situated in a cavernous mountain on an island off the shore of the Night Court. The island is freezing, deserted, and barren. There is sharp, grassy slope leading to the entrance and brutal cliffs that drop to a violent sea beneath. The mountain itself is wide and flat-topped. There's a lot of mist all around this island, which makes it a thin place in the universe, because remember, we know people can travel between worlds, like what Amren did, and the Bone Carver, and the Weaver, and actually quite a few of these creatures that are now in the prison too. There are very strong wards surrounding the prison that keeps anyone from winnowing inside or flying straight to the entrance. This means that visitors, even Rhys, has to walk in the long way. The High Lord of the Night Court is the only one who has the key to the prison because it requires their blood to unlock. So their blood is literally the key. With a drop of the High Lord of the Night Court's blood, this entrance stone vanishes into a ripple of light to reveal pale, carved gates of bone that are so high their tops are lost to the surrounding mist. Once inside, the cavern is so dark. So, how does the prison work? The prison is law unto itself. While it falls in the jurisdiction of the Night Court, it's not technically part of the Night Court like Valaris or the Illyrian Mountains. It is assumed that only the High Lord of the Night Court can sentence monsters here, but his commanders can carry out the sentencing, like Cassian does for Rhys. Once someone is sentenced to the prison and passes through those gates, they belong to the prison. No one can free a prisoner, not even the High Lord of the Night Court. The only known person to escape the prison is Amren, who found a loophole in the spell binding her here and trapped herself in a new body to free herself. The guards dwell within the rock of the mountain. They only emerge at feeding time or to deal with restless prisoners. Rhys describes them as nothing but shadows of thought and an ancient spell. If you look at the gray walls within the prison, it almost looks like those jagged bits could be a nose or a craggy brow or a set of sneering lips. That's so creepy. The prison is absolutely silent. Well, until it's not, as we see in Silver Flames. A few other fun facts about the prison. The harp has been hidden beneath the prison for ages. We don't know how long, but a very, 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 very long time. Since Mor's family used to rule the Night Court a long time ago, the prison also used to be under their jurisdiction. So Mor's family used to be in charge of the prison, like how Rhys is now. We know very little about the inmates in the prison. There is the bone carver, of course. And like I mentioned, Amren had also been there for several millennia until she escaped. We are also familiar with Lanthus, who is another one of the true immortals trapped in the prison. He cannot be killed, only contained. Cassian tricked him by trapping him in an ash mirror and put him in the prison 200 years ago, until Nesta and Ataraxia get their hands on him and find out he is indeed killable. But we are not there yet, folks. That concludes part 1 of today's Suriel Teatime. Keep listening for the first part of Maasverse Madness for part 2. I really did make sure that it only includes lore spoilers, not plot spoilers for the associated book. So if you're okay listening, you're absolutely welcome to, and then stop for the rest of the Maasverse that does include plot spoilers for the other series.
Now it is time to move into our favorite moments. I'm going to kick it off first with when Rhys and Feyre are walking down to the bone carver's prison cell, and she thinks about the prisoners, quote, "I could feel them sleeping, pacing, running their hands and claws over the other side of the walls." While this is basically a horror movie, this is such a cool description about the creepiness of the place we've just entered. Obviously, my favorite moment is everything about Rhys helping Feyre getting ready for the Weaver, dangling lace underwear in front of her, Feyre clapping back with, "You're drooling on the carpet," him kneeling before her, and of course, my personal favorite, quote, "His hands slid down to cup the backs of my knees as he said with a roguish grin, 'You are my salvation, Feyre.'" I love it. This is my favorite Amren line, I think, of all time. And I think it's mainly because of how Jennifer Ikeda, the audiobook narrator of According to Mist and Fury, says it. Amren says to Feyre after she returns from the Weaver, quote, "You smell like barbecue." Iconic. The morning they go to the mortal realm, Cassian and Azriel are wincing over breakfast and, quote, "looked like they'd been run over by wagons." Repeatedly. And then Mor is, of course, totally fine. I love it. Mor is the friend who never gets hungover, and you just hate her a little bit because of that. Just a little bit. Yep. And last but not least, Azriel and Feyre pass through the wall, quote, "I felt it lunge for me. As if enraged, we slipped past, felt the power flare and try to close the gap, but failing." Oh my gosh. At the risk of this sounding totally cheesy, I love when magic is described. Like, that's just so cool. Specifically the wall, too. I just love it so much, especially the difference from when she was a human to now as a Fae. Just, again, amplifying how different things are and how much more power she personally has now and the difference between those two species. Friends, we are about to begin our longest Maasverse Madness we have ever done. And I have a feeling it's not going to be the longest of this book. If you've only read ACOTAR and don't want to hear part 2 of the Suriel topic as it relates to the prison outside of what we know in ACOTAR, it is time to say goodbye. But real quick, next episode we will be covering chapters 23 through 31. And of course, in the meantime, give us a follow on Instagram and TikTok at Fantasy Fangirls Pod for more content. And do not forget to rate and review the podcast. It's one of the best things that you can do for all of your favorite podcasts out there. And it takes like 2 seconds. And the most bestest that you can do is sharing this with your fellow ACOTAR friends. If you had no idea how the Bone Carver lore worked, there you go. You can share it with someone else who also does not know. All right. We are now going to enter our Maasverse Madness segment of the episode, where we call out series crossover references and discuss theories about this multiverse. Like I promised, let's kick it off with the Suriel Teatime Part 2 about the prison. If you don't mind learning about some ACOTAR-related lore that is told in House of Flame and Shadow, please continue. There are no plot spoilers here for House of Flame and Shadow, just lots of lore information as it specifically relates
to the ACOTAR world. I know, it's confusing. The prison used to be a royal territory. Queen Thea claimed this island for herself after they defeated the Daglin. It is a naturally defensive location because the mists keep it veiled from the others. And hey, this was indeed the 8th court, the Dusk Court. We get that confirmation. But it was before the courts were divided up and ruled by the High Lords. The island had a soul that blossomed under Queen Thea's care, nurtured by the Dusk Court she built there. But then Thea and her people left to Midgard, and when Selene returned, their home, the island, the Dusk Court, had been left empty since they vanished. The other Fae of Prythian thought it was cursed after the Dusk Fae left, so Selene made it truly cursed. She damned it all, so only the dungeons remained far beneath the mountain. She started hunting the monsters, the remaining pets of the Daglin, until her once beautiful home became a prison. Quote, until even the lands were disgusted by the evil she'd gathered, that the islands shriveled and the earth became barren. I have to wonder if she personally put Amren in the prison. Although the timeline, it doesn't quite line up because Amren entered the prison before High King Theon and his queen Thea ruled, and the prison didn't actually exist until after he was long gone. But we're just going to keep moving past that here. Selene went on to wed the heir to the High Lord of the Night Court, and once he inherited the title and they had their first son, she brought him to the prison and keyed the wards into his blood. She told him the secret of the records she left for him so that he would know about the buried weapon needed against the Daglin that was located beneath the prison. That secret weapon is indeed the harp, but the secret was supposed to be passed down in the generations of the High Lords of the Night Court. But hey, it didn't happen, and somehow along the way, this information got lost and forgotten. This here is the reason Rhys's family has the blood key to the prison. It's because they are ancestors of Selene, who specifically made their blood the key to the prison, where the secret information would be held secret. I'm not entirely sure how Mora's family ruling the Night Court ties into this timeline, since she does not possess the same attributes or appearance as Selene and Rhys, but they are related, so another thing we're not going to touch on here right now. And that, my friends, is the full story about the prison.
Yay, Lexi!
Okay, that concludes part 2 of today's Suriel topic. The next part of this Maasverse Madness is still House of Flame and Shadow, but there is going to be a plot spoiler in the mix of this. So I'm saying all of this to be super, super safe. Okay. I'm now diving in. The Bone Carver mentions that the cauldron fell into the wrong hands and great and horrible things were done with it. Things were forged with it, wicked things, and the cauldron was stolen back at great cost. We already talked about how the Dread Trove, Gwydion, Narbin, and Truth Teller were forged from it, but let's discuss those wrong hands it fell into. In Selene's big download in House of Flame and Shadow, she says that upon arriving to their world, the Daglin, aka the Asteri, captured it and used their powers to warp it. They turned it from what had been into something even deadlier. It was no longer just a tool of creation, remember the cauldron created this world, but also of destruction. The Daglin, aka the Asteri, they produced the Dread Troves with the cauldron. And somehow, Fionn and Thea had made these weapons, and that is why these weapons answer to their power. It does differ from ACOTAR's version, in which the High Priestess dipped the sword into the cauldron and gave it to Fionn. I'm sorry, everyone. I don't know exactly who made it. It's a little bit unclear. Anyway, the Fae fought the Daglin, aka the Asteri, using the Asteri's own weapons, and they won. And these are going to be the same weapons that Bryce will use to defeat the Asteri once and for all.
Someone sent us a DM the other day being like, I feel like you guys are going to have a PhD in Maasverse by the end of these books. And you know what? I agree.
So funny because we're really learning as we go. We did not have all this information beforehand. We knew kind of the general ties, and then we just, I'll say, know where to look. And we still don't get all of it. But man, it is a PhD. It really is.
Let's just put it this way. Thank God for the ebook function search.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Truly. All right, now let's move into our Throne of Glass discussion, which is just going to be a blanket for the whole Throne of Glass series Maasverse crossovers.
So, who is the Weaver? There is a theory outlined by the Random Phantom Gal that the Weaver is the three-faced goddess that is in both Crescent City and Throne of Glass. A few supporting points include the three-faced goddess is Mother, Maiden, and Crone, which does kind of describe the Weaver with her young supple body, voice sweet and beautiful, and skin that's wrinkled and sagging and dry. The three-faced goddess also had a loom, which, duh, the Weaver does too. The ancient Fae actually did think that the Weaver was a god and they worshipped her. So there's that literal sense as well. When the Bone Carver talks about himself and his siblings, including the Weaver, he draws 3 overlapping interlocked circles. This is the same symbol as the Eye of Elena, a witch symbol of the three-faced goddess, which, by the way, if she's not the three-faced goddess, she could be a witch as well.
Well, on that same note, there is another theory that the Weaver is Vogue, but it also would work if the Weaver was a witch, considering Manon is also part Vogue and along with the other witches. When Feyre throws the chimney brick down on the Weaver, black blood sprays. Alarm, alarm, alarm moment. Book nerd Bree made a comment on a Reddit post that we know the Weaver, like her Sibs, are the gods of death. And Maeve is also a descendant from a god. Could Maeve be a very long descent from the Weaver? Possibly. I don't want to think about what that means for Aelin and Rowan, though, because Maeve, Mab, Aelin's ancestor on her mom's side, and Mora, Rowan's ancestor, were all 3 sisters. Or heck, completely separate, the Weaver could just be one of the OG Vogue. The Vogue hail from an unnamed home dimension. Some people think that this might be from Hell in CC, but Black Blood is really sus, especially given the fact that SJM was working on Mist and Fury in between Queen of Shadows and Empire of Storms, which are seriously packed with a whole bunch of Vogue shit going down. I'm leaning more towards this rather than the Weaver being related to Maeve, just because of what that means for Mab and Mora. But I love the idea of the Weaver being one of the OG Vogue. Now, would this mean that the Bone Carver and Coast J are also Vogue? Possibly, probably, but also if Maeve is Vogue and Mab and Mora weren't, it doesn't necessarily mean that because one sibling is Vogue, the others are too, just depending on what magic you do. We're not going down that rabbit hole. That's way too much lore. We've already done enough. But I love this idea about the Weaver being one of the OG Vogue. I love this idea about the three-faced goddess. Could it be one and the same?
Yes. Absolutely.
I love that.
Yep, it could be. While we're talking about who's who, there is speculation that the Bone Carver is the god of truth based on the Throne of Glass world, or at least they are symbolically parallel. Maureen's wife on Tumblr outlines the similarities. Among them are, in Queen of Shadow, Adian reflects that the god of truth seemed more like a sin eater, and people were supposed to write their horrible sins on the bones of other sinners. It's not unlike the way the Bone Carver collects bones and carves people's deaths in them. This god of truth from Queen of Shadow is the figure that the Temple of Bone is dedicated to, where people come to confess their awful truths upon the bones of other sinners. Well, Feyre comes and confesses some of her painful truths to the Bone Carver. So very cool similarities. I don't think that he specifically is that same god of truth, but I love, again, that symbolism between the two.
Well, and again, the timelines. She was working on Queen of Shadows and then immediately went into Mist and Fury, if not working on them a little overlapped while she was doing edits for Queen of Shadows. This is why she's a brilliant woman. Like, how do you keep all of this shit in your head? Does she just have a major wall, or her Bible for the Maasverse must just be insane?
Talk about needing the e-search functionality.
What I wouldn't give to get my hands on that. Do you know how much easier these outlines would be if we had our hands on that Bible? Oh my God.
Well, we're going to put a pin in all of that right now. Again, remember, friends, we are only on episode 4 of ACOMAF. We have a whole lot more to go, and we are just starting to scrape the surface of all the Maasverse Madness stuff.
That's it for today's episode, folks. Thank you so much for listening to this lore doozy of an episode.
Next episode, we will be covering chapters 23 through 31. We're going to the Mortal Lands. We're going out on the town of Valaris. It's going to be a blast.
Thank you, as always, to our executive producer, Hayden, aka our sanity manager. We love ya.
And if you're interested and want even more content on this ACOMAF journey, please join the Patreon party at patreon.com/fantasyfangirls.
Also, do not forget to sign up for our newsletter. Once a month, we slide into your inbox and we give you a whole slew of fantasy book recs, what Lexi and I are currently up to, a store that we really want to shout out, and so much more, including a trivia question, which this last one was really good because it has to do with one of your Suriel Teatimes that you did recently. It was awesome. So if you want to sign up for our newsletter, hit the link in our show notes.
And of course, if you're not following us on Instagram and TikTok, what are you doing? Give us a follow at Fantasy Fangirls Pod. I promise we're fun on there.
We are fun. Do not forget also to rate and review the show. Like I mentioned, it is one of the best things that you can do for not only this podcast, but for any podcast that you listen to. And it takes like 2 seconds. It's so kind. Thank you so much to the 9,000 people who have done it already. You guys are our best friends. Last but not least, do not forget to share this episode with your fellow ACOTAR friends. If you and your friends also want a PhD in the Maasverse, this is a great episode to send them.
All right, we will talk to you next week. Thank you so much. We love you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Ooh, the bone carver that a bone. What?
I was already ahead. There we go.
I was like, wow, I didn't know our delay was that
Sorry,
much.
I was like, I was a whole paragraph down and I was like, okay, you're still going. Nope. Anyway.
How?
Quit it on.
Guidian?
Cesare. There is a war. There's a war. Effortless. Oh my God.
Were we delirious when we wrote this outline? Like,
I've even gone through and edited most of your stuff too, and I was like, I'm so glad how long you have this for editing, because you're gonna be listening to this and be like, oh my God,
I'm gonna need it. I'm gonna need it.
Like,
try that again. What? As our crew leaves the prison, commas are important, Nicole. Screw you, tech!